Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Faith Unaltered. I'm your host, David Russell, and I'm here with my awesome co host, Tyler Fowler. What is up, buddy?
What it do, David? How are you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm good, buddy. I'm good.
Yeah, I'm excited. We are having a debate. We haven't had one of these in a while, and I am super stoked to be. I'm honored to moderate this debate with our good friends Dale Glover and Jordan from Reasons to Doubt. And so, guys, I am super excited to have you all here with us. We are debating, like I said tonight. Um, And so, what we're going to do is Dale is going to go first. He's going to give a 15-minute opening statement affirming the Shroud of Turin. Jordan is taking the negative and he will give a 15-minute opening statement. After that, we will jump in to an informal type of dialogue setting where you, the audience, can ask questions if you so choose. Now, check this out. We are doing something new tonight, and I'm just super, super proud and super excited to announce that we have hit 1,000 subscribers. We hit our goal, and now we're
Woo!
yeah, right. I told David before we went on air is we need like little sound effects, like a real radio show, And so I want to work on getting some sound effects going on. But anyway, we have hit 1,000 subscribers, so thank you all so much. We couldn't do it without you guys, and so we love our listeners, and we thank you all for that. And so we're doing something new tonight. We are going to be taking our first super chats. And so this is something that you can only that's only accessible once a channel hits 1,000 subs. And so if you would like to be our first super chat and you have a question that has anything to do with the Shroud of Turin, please feel free to do that and ask that question. Super chats will take priority so they don't get lost in the mix of all the other questions. They will take priority. We will try to get to them as soon as they're asked. If not, we don't want to interrupt our guests tonight. And so, what we will do is if we do get a super chat and they are in the middle of a conversation, they're saying something, we will get to that super chat immediately after that transition, and so that you will be the first to get your question asked. And so, with that being said, David, is there anything that you would like to say before we introduce our guests and debaters tonight?
Yeah, man. I'm excited too. I've known Jordan for a long time and Dale, and
Yeah.
it's just good to have them here because they're both super reasonable guys. I mean, they've been on the show. If you don't know who they are, you don't know their podcast, then guess what? You haven't been listening to the show. I always
Yeah.
say that. But yeah, I mean, these guys are great, and there's nobody that I would like to listen to debate this than these two guys. These guys are very knowledgeable on
Mm,
whatever they talk about. I remember one of the first reasons to doubt I got to listen to was on the vaccinations, and I was just Jordan had me rolling the whole time. It was pretty good. And then Dale, of course, we went against Date, trying to figure out hell and all this stuff, and that was fun. And we formed a bond, and we've been hanging out ever since, through email and whatever. Even though you're in Canada and you drink milk from bags, but also, guys, if there's anything in the super chats about our guests you want to know, as long as it's not personal. I mean, I'm more thinking about the bow tie and the glasses, so if you
yeah.
want to ask them about their why Dale wears his sunglasses at night and Jordan is prancing around with a bow tie, then ask him that too. You can super chat that
Haven't
as
I
well.
already answered that though? I think your audience
You
would.
have, you have, but you know what? If it's a super chat, then we'll get to it first.
Yeah, we'll do it. I don't care.
But no, seriously, guys, like I said, I'm honored to be here. I've had a great week,
Yeah.
except for you remember when you were with us, Tyler, in the summer, and we had that engine misfire on coil 3.
Yes.
Now there's coil
Yes.
1 misfired on
No!
me last week.
Ditch it.
Yeah,
Ditch
just
the
get it just
van
today.
and get a new one, bro. Scrap
Oh
it, buy a
man, we're
new
in the
one.
works. We're in the
Okay.
works. But anyway, yeah, that's all I got to say, guys. Is it's an honor to be here, and it's good to hear you guys and see you guys.
Absolutely. I just want to say this. So Dell and Teddy Pappas has convinced me of the Shroud. I was a Shroud skeptic for the longest time. And listening to Dell's Real Seeker channel, if you have not subscribed to that, you need to go do that after this episode. Go subscribe to Real Seekers. But I was listening. We interviewed Dale on the Shroud on I think it was either CSG or Pora. I was a guest on whenever David was doing Pora. And I was blown away. And so that really compelled me to research this topic a little bit deeper. And y'all know how I am whenever I research. Like, that is front and foremost, right, for me. And so then we brought on Teddy, who's a good friend of Dell. She's a good friend of ours as well. And actually, she was on the show last week whenever we were talking about icons in Eastern Orthodoxy. Great show. If you haven't checked that out, go look at it. But just listening to her on this subject, she is a shroud specialist, and I was blown away by it. And so, lining up all the evidence, I was convinced that the Shroud of Turin is legit. It's real. It's not a forgery by any stretch of the imagination. And so I'm really, really excited. So Jordan, you've got your work cut out for you tonight. Convince me I'm wrong. No, I'm just playing. I'm just playing. But guys, I will go ahead and let our guests introduce themselves. And so since Dale has the affirmative, he will be going first. Dale, you've got the mic, brother.
Okay. So this is just introducing who I am, kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Dale from Real Seekers. Basically, I started out. I was the co-host of a podcast called Skeptics and Seekers. So that was kind of a weekly podcast where there was an atheist host, and then there was me representing the Christian, and we would debate various topics related to theology and philosophy of religion and that sort of thing. From there, I went to Real Seekers as just a solo host, and yeah, I do all sorts of things. I have various guests on, people like Gary Habermas, who's on David's show as well, Mike Lacona, Lydia McGrew, stuff like that. I also do my own solo shows. So, things like the existence of God, the cosmological argument, or the hiddenness of God argument for atheism, sorry. And obviously relevant to tonight, I have my Shroud Wars series, which is where I'm going over all the evidence for the Shroud, for and against it, and bringing on experts to talk about that.
Right on, brother. Right on. And Jordan, before we get to you, I do want to clarify. So I saw a question in our audience, in our chat. And so, yes, a super chat is basically a way to donate to the show, a way to fund the show. And so you can put a donation anywhere from up to, I think the minimum is $1 you have to put in. I could be wrong on that. Guys, correct me if I am. But I think the minimum is $1, and you can donate. I mean, I've seen people donate 100 before. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing, just because this is going live on Real Seekers and Faith Unaltered, so I don't have 1,000 subscribers, so people couldn't donate to you through my channel. They'd have to your thing, right?
I think that's correct. I don't think the option would be available for them on the Real Seekers, but if you hop on over to Faith Unaltered, you can do that. So yes, I thank you for saying that, Dell. And so that, like I said, it's just a way to fund the show. And we would get those donations to help us with equipment and advertisement and things of that nature. So if you'd like to help fund the show, super chats are the way to go. Also, if you would like to donate to us without super chatting, email me at faithunaltered@gmail.com, and I will get you a link to be able to help us with that process. And so, Jordan, without further ado, brother, the mic is yours. Introduce yourself, and obviously you're taking the negative position tonight. Give us a little background of how you came to start investigating the Shroud and what led you really up to this point.
Sure. So yeah, I'm Jordan. I am an atheist, by which I mean I believe no gods exist. I run the Reason to Doubt YouTube channel / podcast with a friend of mine named Jared. He is a theologian, or at least he went to seminary, and we're both atheists now. So I'm a skeptic first and foremost, and so our channel is focused on debunking things. And in the course of that, the Shroud of Turin kind of came up. There was a video that Jared saw, and we were like, honestly, we were a little overwhelmed in terms of work at the time. So what we'll do, we'll kind of pull the curtain back and we'll just do a live riff on this thing. We'll just, kind of show people what the thought process is when we're seeing a claim, right? And we'll just talk about the things we would investigate further. And we did that. And it was, for the scale of our channel, super popular for reasons I can't understand, but for whatever reason it was. And we promised at some point in the future to do a more deeper dive, which we have now done. We promised to do a video, so we did a it ended up being 3 parts. We were going to do 1 video and there was just too much. So we did 2 and that was too much. So we did 3 and we were just like, for our sanity, we have to end now. So, but we're going to keep. So that's how I got into investigating the shroud. It's just one of the claims that we tackled on the channel, and we'll probably end up doing more content about it in the future too.
Fair enough. You know, I've noticed real quick before we get started is the Shroud of Turin. It's one of those things that it can be talked about in all sects of Christianity, right? And even atheistic like groups and stuff like that. And you know, you either love it or you hate it. And I've never seen a middle ground whenever it comes to the Shroud of Turin. So that was really interesting to me. So guys, again, thank you for introducing yourselves. I am excited to get this show on the road. And so, David, if there's nothing else, we will go ahead and get started with Dale's opening statement.
Nope, we are good to go.
All right.
All right, perfect. So let me bring up my slides here for my opening.
Okay.
Share screen.
And Dale, just so I'm on the same page, I've done forgot, forgive me. Do you want your slides soloed or do you just want to keep them like this?
Okay, so how does it yeah, like that's fine, like the half screen thing. As long as you guys can see like here, let me from current slide. Like, can you guys see the text?
I'm in full screen mode and yeah.
And before we start, I just want to encourage everybody, check out both these guys' channels. They've got a lot of good content. Even if you disagree with them, check them out, learn a little something, you know. So I just want to throw that out there.
I like that, David. We can all learn from each other.
Yep.
And so that's exactly what we're trying to do tonight. So
awesome. Yeah, cool. Well, I'm gonna try my best to go as fast as I can to get this in 50 minutes here. So okay, cool. So first of all, I just want to say thank you very much to Jordan and to you, Tyler and David, for doing this debate on the Shroud. It's an important topic. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to studying the Shroud, there are 2 major avenues of study, categories of study: the historicity of the Shroud and evidence pertaining to the nature of the Shroud images and, you know, how they might have been formed. In tonight's debate, we're going to be solely focusing on the historicity of the Shroud. And we've opted to talk about 3 topics: the irrelevance of the dating, the Shroud's link to the Sudarium of Oviedo, and the 1988 carbon-14 dating of the Shroud. So in terms of the irrelevance of the dating, just to save time, essentially the way I see it, this is a Shroud skeptic claim. They're claiming an argument. They're making an argument. Look, premise 1, if the Shroud is probably medieval, then the Shroud images are not miraculous signs from God that Christianity is true. Premise 2, the Shroud is in fact probably medieval, therefore they're not miraculous signs that Christianity is true. And most of our debate is going to be focused on debating premise 2, but I also challenge premise 1. And I want to say, look, Mr. Skeptic, you have the burden of proof here. If you want to establish the claim, you have to prove that premise 1 is true. So I'm just gonna leave it to Jordan to make his case and see what reasons he gives us to think that premise 1 is true, and we'll deal with that in the discussion period. But to save time, I'm going to move on to the premise 2 arguments. So this is where I have the burden of proof on the Sudarium of Oviedo. And the first thing to note is that it's really important to look at the totality of the evidence, right? There are at least 16 or more dating methods for the Shroud. And most, if not virtually all of these, do show that the Shroud is not medieval and or is consistent with a 1st century AD date. There's only been one scientific test that's shown the Shroud to be medieval, and that's the carbon dating. So in terms of this totality, we have to look at all the evidence here. When all the evidence contradicts one, we can't cherry pick. And even the famous carbon-14 scientist, the head of Oxford, Dr. Christopher Ramsay, agrees. He says, with the radiocarbon measurements and all the other evidence we have about the Shroud, there does seem to be a conflict in the interpretation of the different evidence. And for that reason, he thinks we should all go back to the drawing board and have a serious rethink in order to come up with a coherent story. So this isn't just a pro-Shroud claim. Now, in terms of my evidence, the Sudarium of Oviedo, my goal here is just to prove that the Shroud is not medieval. I can't prove that the Shroud belonged to Jesus on the basis of the Sudarium, but I can say that it's consistent with a 1st century date. So what is this Sudarium? Essentially, it's the head cloth mentioned in the Gospel of John. And in terms of the history of the Sudarium, it's relatively uncontroversial. Pretty much everyone agrees that it is centuries older than the medieval period. We have various documents attesting to its existence, the earliest of which is an anonymous document dated to 570 AD, where it's placed in Jerusalem near a cave of the monastery of St. Mark. And additionally, it has been carbon dated at least three times. And again, it gives a date of about 700 AD there. Okay, so great. How do we link the Sudarium to the shroud then? I'm going to be looking at listing four lines of evidence. So the first are there are anatomical similarities of the features of the face. They present the same size and proportions. The bloodstains and body fluids on the cloth are in the same relative location and size as both cloths. And there's been limestone dust that corresponds in a remarkable way. And then finally, we have a pollen find on the Sudarium of Oviedo that suggests it dates to prior to 300 AD. And obviously, since the shroud will be linked to the Sudarium, that means the shroud predates 300 AD as well. Okay, so what are some of these anatomical similarities here? So number one, the nose has been found to be the same. There's superciliary ridges. There's also an absence of the right cheekbone, which corresponds to swelling on the shroud man's right cheekbone on the Shroud of Turin. The tip of the nose, nostrils, and nose wings, the position and size of the mouth, the chin, and finally the shape of the beard. In terms of the bloodstains and body fluids themselves, these have been shown to be relatively the same in location and size and that sort of thing to a sufficient degree whereby many forensic experts, including I've listed Jose Delfin Villan Blanco, who's a professor of forensic medicine, as well as Alfonso Sanchez Hermosilla, they conclude that, look, there would be no problem to convince a court of justice regarding the assertion that the Turin Shroud and the Oviedo Sudarium enveloped the corpse of the same person. Now, there are objections. I'm going to leave that out of the opening to fit in, and when Jordan raises them, we'll come back to those. But there are objections, obviously. So I'll skip that. Additionally, in 2016, there was a morphological study. And the main thing here is that Dr. Juan Manuel Minaro discovered that there seems to be unquestionable the fact that there's correspondence of the sources. So the point at which the blood flows start, these correspond on both cloths. And he concludes in the article, look, we have come to the point where it is forensically absurd to suggest that these similar blood flows just happen by pure happenstance, where all of the wounds, lesions, and swelling coincide on both cloths. Okay, so here's something that's really remarkable to me, and it was pointed out by Dr. Cesar Barta. And it's the fact that half of a blood stain is found on the shroud. So we have this donut stained. There's a hole in the middle where there's missing blood. It's like a donut of blood. Well, guess what? The corresponding matching other half of this blood stain is found on the Sudarium. So they link these two cloths. Half is on the blood stain is on the shroud. The other half is on the Sudarium. So in terms of there's also been limestone dust studies. Okay, so this is with X-ray fluorescence, spectral instruments, and the correspondence here. So at the tip of the nose on the Sudarium, they get this high-level chemical concentration of a specific chemical signature for this limestone dust. This corresponds to the tip of the nose on the shroud man. So this links the two cloths. Additionally, this also coincidentally matches the same chemical concentration in the limestone at Calvary in Jerusalem. I'm not going to be arguing that we can prove it came from Jerusalem, but just be aware of that link, that it is consistent with it. Finally, we have the pollen studies here. And essentially, I'm not going to be looking at Max Frey's stuff or any of the controversial stuff. I'm only looking at Boy's 2016 peer-reviewed findings. And he found that there was this genus, right? I'm not going for species and that sort of thing, but there is the specific type of pollen entrenched in a blood stain, meaning that pollen grain got on there at the time the blood was being put on the cloth. It wasn't later contamination. And This is consistent with certain plants used for raisins, gum, and oil used in ancient burial rituals mentioned in Pliny the Elder and some other Roman historians there. Now, here's the key part about this in terms of dating. Because these particular botanical products stopped being used in funeral rituals during the Great Crisis of the Roman Empire, which is in the 3rd century, around 220 to 280, thereabouts, and stuff like that. So therefore, we can date the Sudarium to 200s AD or earlier. And guess what? Because we forensically linked the shroud to the Sudarium, that means the shroud is 200 AD or earlier. So that's where this study is relevant. Finally, the Sudarium has been carbon dated, as I said, and it's 679 to 710. And this is potentially problematic, but there is an explanation for the Pro-Shroud side, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so carbon dating. So in 1988, the 3 AMS carbon-14 labs dated the shroud, one sample of the shroud, and got a date 1260 to 1390 with a claimed 95% degree of confidence. There have been various proposals trying to explain that. I'll skip over that for time. But one thing I want to note here is that in terms of the AMS carbon-14 dating method, this was new. It was only about 10 years old at the time. And in terms of dating linen textiles in particular, there have been some issues. So I quote here various carbon-14 experts just prior to 1989 saying that they had grave concern that the AMS technology was not ready for the task of dating the shroud because there's been very little testing of linen with this new method. Now, sure, I can hear the shroud skeptic saying, yeah, but okay, they've done further experiments and that's no longer a problem, or we've discovered it's not an issue. Well, even as of 2023, Beta Analytics, the foremost world's experts in AMS carbon dating, this is the top lab in probably the world, even they say that the AMS carbon-14 dating, they will not undertake carbon dating of any textiles unless it's a part of a multidisciplinary scholarly process. So this is relevant to the shroud because they're saying you shouldn't just believe in the carbon dating, it should be part of a multidisciplinary process. Well, remember, we've got those other dating methods and they all contradict the medieval hypothesis. So therefore, you can't believe in the carbon-14 dating. Additionally, I've also presented various undercutting defeaters. So it's important to note the shroud skeptic on this front has the burden of proof for this, for the carbon dating, not me. I'm not going to be making a positive claim. I'm just presenting undercutting defeaters to defeat Jordan's epistemic justification. And the couple ones I want to focus on is the fact that they only dated one sample. And also Bob Rucker's discovered various statistical problems, and there's proof of a systematic measurement error, which means we can't rely on it. So in terms of the single sample dating, even Harry Gove, he's the guy who invented AMS carbon dating. Trust me, he's no friend to Pro-Shroud experts. He's like the Richard Dawkins of his era. He hated Christians and the shroud and all that. But he even admits, look, this new procedure of only dating one sample will produce a dating result that will be questioned in strictly scientific terms by many scientists around the world because of this arbitrarily small statistical basis. The use of a single sample is ill-advised as it will not generate a reliable date, but will rather give rise to world controversy. This is the guy who invented the technique. Okay, so finally we get into Bob Rucker type stuff. So additionally, there's also been problems because in 1989, they published 12 raw dates here from the 3 labs. And the reason they did that, they eliminated the outliers, and this allowed them to arrive at a 95% degree of confidence in their results using what's called a chi-square test. Now, problem is, in 2017, legal action was threatened against the British Museum by a guy named Tristan Casabianca, and they discovered that actually there were 16 results. And when you include all of those results, you get a range from 1155 to 1410. That's the range of dates. And you also find out that actually they don't have the 95% degree of certainty, because here are the 3 lab results, and these are the uncertainties, right, within 1 sigma that they have. And what they did in 1988 is they said, well, 1260 is the line of best fit. Is it? It's not even touching the other two labs. Really, the line of best fit is this one that Bob Rucker has calculated as it goes through all three. So what you do is you have a slope of about 36 years per centimeter. So from the edge of the cloth, every centimeter that you date, it's going up by 36 years kind of thing, right? And this is what causes the statistical problems. This is what allows Bob Rucker to calculate there's a 98.6% probability that there is a systematic measurement error at play in the results that were obtained. And because of that, you have to reject the results. What they got was 3 sigma difference. I know that's a technicality, but basically you have to get 2 sigma difference. That's an international statistical standard with the chi-squared test. That's what allows you to say 95% degree of confidence. They didn't have that. So that means we have to throw the results in the garbage. We can't trust the results at all. You're unjustified in believing them. Now, unless Jordan can prove what the systematic measurement error was, what caused that systematic measurement error. Now, I, as a pro-shroud guy, I have a theory, Bob Rucker's hypothesis of neutron absorption. I'm not going to present that in my opening because I don't want to distract from the fact that Jordan has the burden of proof here, right? He has to prove to us that that systematic measurement error is not inconsistent with a medieval date or is consistent with that medieval date before anyone's allowed to believe in the carbon dating. So yeah, with that, I will end, and I hope I was within the 15 minutes there. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, 20 seconds left, brother.
Yep.
Awesome. I did it. Okay.
Good job.
Awesome.
Gold star.
Thank you.
All right, Jordan, whenever you want to begin, sir, you start speaking. I will start the timer.
All right. Let me get my shared screen in the background.
Okay.
Okay. I'll let you know when I want that up.
All
right. All right. I am Jordan, and I am a lot of things. I'm an atheist. I'm an engineer, graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University. Go Rams. I am also an analyst working for a bank because I have a ton of money. But most importantly, I am a skeptic. A lot of people hear that and think that that means that I'm fundamentally opposed to the existence of God and believing in miracles is verboten or something like that. That's not how I see it. I think that anybody, including the religious, can be a skeptic. Being skeptical is just about having doubts. It's about only believing things for which you have good evidence. And most importantly, it's about caring about the truth. After all, if you want to know what's true, you should be looking for evidence, right? So today, let's all be skeptics together. The position that I will be defending today is that the Shroud of Turin is likely a medieval artifact and is therefore not the authentic burial shroud of Jesus Christ. So I'm just going to skip right to what I think the single best piece of evidence is, the one that we just heard trashed for 5 or 10 minutes, the radiocarbon dating. So if you're watching this, you've probably heard of radiocarbon dating. In fact, I know you have because you just did. You know, it's a thing that scientists use to date old stuff, but it's important to know how it works in order to assess its evidence. So here's your crash course on how it works. In nature, everything is made of atoms. Some of those atoms are unstable. They'll eventually break apart into other things. We call these atoms radioactive if they are unstable in this way. The amount of time it takes for half of it to go away, call that the half-life. All atoms are made of some sort of element. They transform elements to this radioactive decay. Carbon-14 is one such radioactive element. It is produced in the atmosphere by cosmic rays. Living creatures like you, me, wheat, everything else, we absorb C14 ultimately from the atmosphere. And so living creatures tend to have about as much C14 in them as the atmosphere does. When the creatures when they die, they stop absorbing the C14. So there's no more coming in. So it's just decaying away into nitrogen. And since we know how fast this happens, we know the rate, we can look at how much C14 there is now, and we can do some math that will show us how long it has been since the thing died. One caveat to this, it's very important. The sample that you're testing needs to be thoroughly cleaned so you can tell that the carbon from it is from the thing and not something else. So like imagine you were dating a 5,000-year-old artifact, but you're eating a sandwich over top of it and you drop some mustard on it. Well, now if you date that without cleaning it, you're going to be dating the mustard, because the mustard is radioactive. Your food is radioactive. You're radioactive. Everything's radioactive. So you have to clean it. That's why labs go to great efforts to clean their samples before they test them, but it is never going to be perfect. So now that we are all experts in radiocarbon dating, let's go back to the Shroud of Turin. In the late 80s, as we heard, a team of researchers took a small cutting from one corner of the Shroud of Turin. At this point, we can put up the slide because I think a picture is helpful. That sample was small, measuring just 73 millimeters by 17 millimeters. About half of it was reserved for later use, and half was sent to the 3 labs that they used, one in Arizona, one in Zurich, and one in Oxford. The labs did their work. They published their results in the journal Nature, and they reported 1260 to 1390. Now, the study is not without its flaws, which I will address in a moment, but let's keep in mind what we are trying to get from these results. All we need to know is the shroud from the 1st century? Yes or no? It's not a big deal if the dating's off by a few decades here or there. What is important is it off by 1,000 years or more? So this is where this picture is going to come in handy. If you look at the order coming from the edge of the shroud, they are laid out with reserve. Don't worry about that. It's not important. But it goes Oxford, Zurich, then Arizona. That order is going to be important, so try to remember it. So the dates from Zurich and Arizona are pretty much in agreement with each other. They're right on top of each other. Oxford's don't quite match up to the other two. Oxford's latest date is 1220, while the other labs have that as the earlier date. The numbers there won't match because those are years before 1950 for technical reasons that aren't important. So some analysis was done in 2012 by Riani et al. That showed that Oxford being different wasn't just random chance. You're going to have some random variation, but this wasn't it. There was, in fact, systematic bias involved. That means that it wasn't just bad luck. In fact, as was mentioned, if you plot the average age reported by each lab, you'd see a slope going up as you traveled further away from the edge of the cloth. That is all true. But what may not be obvious from the picture you get in those papers and the picture we saw earlier is how that actually looks. So what I've done here is I've plotted all of the measurements. The raw data was eventually released to the public. This is all of those measurements, and it is laid out. We don't know exactly where within each lab stuff they put their measurement. At least I haven't seen that published anywhere. So what I did was I put all of the measurements in the way most consistent with what I'll be talking about later, Bob Rucker's hypothesis, which is as you move further from the edge of the shroud to the middle, it will show up younger. That's what it looks like. Okay. So you can see that Zurich and Arizona are right on top of each other. Oxford is not quite on top of them. It's a little bit off to the side, but this is the kind of thing that you want to fit a slope. And technically it is true. There is a slight slope as you go to the right. So there are some explanations for this. Bob Rucker looked at this information here, and because of this sloping age, he came up with what I think might be the most elaborate ad hoc hypothesis the world has ever seen. He said that the cloth appears to have more carbon-14 as you go away from the edge, because it in fact does have more carbon-14 as you go away from the edge, but it's not due to contamination. No, it is due to a burst of neutron radiation that emitted from the resurrecting Jesus. Of course, this radiation is special radiation, and we couldn't just have normal radiation that goes in every direction. No, this radiation goes straight up, not in every direction. Why? Don't worry about it. The source for this special radiation isn't known, but what's the source? Who cares? Doesn't matter. All that matters is it gives the NCMP calculations give the answer he likes, which is that that it's because of this magic burst of radiation. Now, Bob isn't here to defend his model today, so I don't want to come down on it too hard, but I will point out a few things. First, the prediction is that the dates will go oldest on the outside edge of the shroud, younger as you go. And if you only look at the averages, that is clearly what you see. However, if you look at the actual dates, it goes up and then down, because that's how the lab results are. Now, this does not necessarily rule out Rucker's model. It's possible that, in fact, the true age is going up, but due to some unlucky variation, it comes out this way. So it doesn't rule out Rucker, but it is certainly a piece of disconfirming evidence. So that's not what we see. Worse than this, though, is that there is no evidence whatsoever for Rucker's model that wasn't A, the very thing the model was invoked to explain, with namely the slope, or B, an input to his model. Rucker explicitly normalizes the results of his MCMP calculation to he has to. Like the calculations he did, the modeling he did, can't give an absolute date. You have to give it a known value. His known value is the radiocarbon dating. So, because there is no external evidence for this, it's just what he was either trying to explain or the things he put into it. Rucker's model is ad hoc. Now, I will say this in favor of Rucker's model. It makes very clear, easily tested predictions about what would be found were we to test other pieces of the shroud. So in that arena, Rucker's model absolutely rocks. However, You don't get any points for making predictions. You only get points for having them confirmed. And none of Rutgers' predictions have been confirmed in a way that is unambiguous. Okay. Nobody should put a single gram of confidence into this elaborate rationalization of unevidenced conjecture unless and until further testing is done. Okay. But Rutgers model aside, and I don't think I need this anymore. Rutgers model aside, we do actually have a discrepancy. Like, there is absolutely systematic bias going on, and we need to explain that. So what is one possible explanation? Well, we can look to the 2020 paper written by Walsh and Schwalb that was titled An Instructive Interlaboratory Comparison. They looked at the difference between the three labs. They determined that while there was disagreement with Zurich and Arizona against Oxford, the lab's results were internally consistent. Okay. They also pointed out that while Oxford is technically outside of the bounds, the difference is extremely slight. They said that if Oxford's dates had been shifted just 10 years, then the samples would accord with each other. We wouldn't be having this discussion at all, right? And so to explain this, they noted that Oxford actually had slightly different cleaning procedures than the other two labs. Specifically, they used petroleum ether, which is very good at removing lipids and waxes from samples, such as you might have on the Shroud of Turin. Zurich and Arizona did not have that. Now, how much contamination would you need? Because all labs cleaned it, of course. So how much contamination extra would you need for Oxford to get rid of to explain this? Well, that depends on how old the contamination is. You'd need less the closer to the present that contamination is. But suppose it were 18th century. Oxford would need to be just 1.7% better at cleaning the sample than Zurich and Arizona were. So we've got two options on offer. Either Jesus emitted a burst of radiation in defiance of all known laws of physics, such that this is the Rosetta Stone to new exotic physics and different dimensions and all other this kind of stuff. Or one lab was a little bit better at cleaning its sample than the other two. Now, I think it's perfectly obvious which one of these we should prefer as an explanation, but I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader, I guess. Now, some Shroud supporters say that this is a bridge too far. They note that the lab's results do not, in fact, match, that there were different procedures between one versus the other. There are irregularities that throw it outside of the 95% confidence level, and therefore we should throw it in the garbage. We should pretend as if it never existed. We should just completely purge it from our minds. And that, I think, would be a grave mistake. Whatever else you may believe, their measurements remain. We can't use these results to say whether it was 1260 or 1300 or 1350. I agree. These results aren't reliable to that degree. However, they do still give us valuable information. The information they give us is that they did detect this much carbon-14. They detected too much for it to be first century, and therefore it is likely not first century. Okay, and that's the important thing to hold on to. So let me sum up what I talked about. The Shroud of Turin was radiocarbon dated to the 13th to 14th centuries. There is a slight discrepancy between Oxford and the other two labs. This discrepancy, if Oxford's dates were just moved a little bit, it would disappear, but they weren't. Fair enough, but it is a small discrepancy. The difference required to reconcile these would be just 2% better cleaning procedures on Oxford compared to the other two if it were 18th century contamination. And that is a much more plausible and less ad hoc explanation. So it's the one we should prefer. While the issues with these reports are very real, and I fully endorse that we should have more carbon dating done, we should test other samples all throughout the Shroud. I'm all in favor of that. I am not standing in anyone's way to rip this thing apart and test it further. But if your interests are only whether the Shroud is first century versus 14th, which is what my interests are, then the carbon dating is more than sufficient to tell you that.
All right. Thank you so much, Jordan. All right, guys. So that ends the opening segments or the opening statement segments. And just good job to both of y'all. And so just so I'm following, I want to just kind of lay out what I heard just quickly, and then we can jump into it. So Dale, just a brief summary. What you're saying is that there are more, there definitely different tests that you're relying on to get you a date that's earlier than medieval. And what Jordan is saying is that no, the radiocarbon dating kind of sets it in stone for you that this is a medieval artifact. Is that, am I following? For the most part?
Yeah, so in my case, I would definitely, for the purposes of this debate, we're just looking at the Sudarium and the carbon
Mhm.
14. But yeah, I did briefly mention there are at least 16 methods, kind of thing. But
Right.
Just out of curiosity, and we're not going to dive into all of them, but what are these 16 methods?
oh,
Can you just name a few just so we can get an impression of what they are?
of course, yeah. So the Hungarian Prey Codex, there's the Justinian coins from 692 to 695, where Fonte has done a statistical analysis and concluded that the engraver was looking at the shroud in 692 when he made that. There's also the Sudarium of Oviedo, which we're talking about here today. Um, there's various textile evidences. So, for example, I know that you covered Hugh Ferry's argument that it's medieval based on the weaving defects. But what I found is that we can actually detect that there are no warp or weft regulators present on the loom that made the shroud. And that proves it can't be medieval. It has to come from ancient times because they all would have had stuff like that.
So what I'll say about these is that while you can have 16 or 24 or 100 different methods, what matters is how strong these methods are, and I don't find those other methods convincing. I mean, so it's a difference in magnitude. I think we have one extremely convincing piece of evidence that is more than all of these others, which I don't particularly find very persuasive. But since we're not going to actually talk about those, we should probably stop talking about them and talk about something else.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Does that answer? And yeah, in terms of my view on the carbon dating, where I would disagree, I don't think that we are justified at all, not even 51%, in believing the shroud is medieval on the basis of the carbon 14 dating evidence. So that's my difference there, Tyler, if that helps.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, I'm just gonna hand it over to you guys and let you do your thing, and then if I have any more questions, I'll jump in if David doesn't have anything.
Well, since you opened with the irrelevance of the dating, and I think before we talk about whether we should date it, why don't we talk about whether that's even relevant at all, right?
Awesome.
So
Yes.
if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that I, as a skeptic, must hold. I must assert that the shroud is not is medieval and is not a miracle.
Yeah, I mean, if there's something to talk about, like if you don't think that's a claim on your part, but yeah, you don't have to bear the burden of proof. But if you do think that it's true that if the shroud is probably medieval, then that means it can't be a miracle. Then what's your reason, kind of thing?
I don't think it not being. I don't think that it being medieval necessarily precludes it being a miracle. However, what I do think is that if it weren't Jesus' authentic burial shroud, nobody would care about it at all. If it is not Jesus' authentic burial shroud, then it is just the most elaborate Jesus on toast ever to have shown up, right? The only reason we're talking about this at all is because you and I assume you, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think it's pretty safe to think you think it's authentic. And everybody in the audience who's rooting for me to fail, they all think this is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus. I don't think anybody would be talking about this in any way, except maybe Otangelo, if this weren't right, if this weren't the authentic burial shroud of Jesus. So while I don't think that it being medieval necessarily precludes it being, I mean, God can do whatever he wants, right? So if he wants to make an image in the Middle Ages, he can do that if he really wants to. But like, who cares about it then? Like, who is the person that cares about it?
Well, so I am actually like this is literally I wrote a 300-page chapter on the shroud. That's a chapter, right? But nothing on the dating at all, because to me, the most important thing about the shroud is that we can prove those images are probably miraculous, of a miraculous nature. So I focus on the scientific, physical, and chemical properties, what I call these minimal relevant features, and that led me to, in part, led me to faith to Christ. I could care less whether it's medieval or belong to Jesus. I wouldn't say I care less.
If you want to concede right now that it's medieval, then we can just go home. We can just end the debate. I will happily say that doesn't mean it's not a miracle. We can just end it right now.
Okay. Well, I'm not conceding, because in point of fact, I don't believe it is medieval. But even if it were, I think we could, sure, let's concede the debate, and I can still prove it's a miracle. If you give that to me, great, become a Christian, and we'll go home together. But
so what bugs me about this is, while I do think it is technically true that it could be like that, this feels a little bit like a Mott and Bailey defense. Like, you've got the bigger claim that it is Jesus' authentic burial shroud, miraculous thing with the resurrection, but that is too hard to defend. So we're going to retreat back into our castle on the Mott over there, and we're going to, oh well, it's not actually authentic. It's not actually first century. Are the skeptics all gone? Awesome. And then they just run back out, and now it's first century again. Like, just defend the position you hold. The whole position you hold is that it's first century. Defend it.
Yeah, and I do, right, in my shows, but to me, I don't think we have to defend something like it's sufficient. If I can prove that it's a miracle, let's pretend I can convince you with my argumentation that you are convinced, yeah, this thing is a miracle of God to authenticate Christianity. That's the most important thing. Who cares if it actually covered Jesus? God is giving us a miracle. It's the equivalent to you today praying right here, God give me a miracle, and he does. Are you saying well, that didn't go to Jesus' time, I'm not going to believe that? No, you're going to be appropriately converted, right?
I just think, well, I cannot prove that it's not a miracle, because if God wanted to, if I was going to be deceived by a trickster God who really, for some reason, wanted to make a burial shroud in the 14th century with all the features it has, if he wants to trick me, there's nothing I can do to stop him from tricking me, right? But what I can say is that it is likely not the authentic burial shroud of Jesus, and that's where my interest mostly ceases. If it didn't touch the holy testicles, then I'm not that interested in it.
Oh goodness. Okay. One thing that's interesting, because this is I've dealt with about 7 reasons that skeptics will give to try and warrant that premise one. Maybe I should be sharing it. I don't know, but that premise one, that if it is medieval, then it's not a miracle. One of them is that this is one that David Russell himself gave, that it makes God a trickster or a deceiver. And I think this is the most weighty objection, but I still don't see it.
I don't see how the conversation went this way so fast.
Okay, well, let me ask another thing. So
what's wrong with it?
I don't think.
No, it's not. I love it.
So
Okay.
You mentioned that I have the burden of proof for all of premise one. I actually don't think I do. I think if I'm going to say it's not first century, then that is something I should be able to demonstrate, right? But if you want to say it's a miracle, that's on you. Like, if you want to prove that it's a miracle, that's on you to prove to us. And if but not you, like, as a person, but it's on the position, right, to be demonstrated. And if the position can't be demonstrated to the point where it's the most probable explanation, then the appropriate thing to do is not accept it. So I don't accept that I have the burden of proof to prove it is not a miracle. You have to prove that it is.
Fully agree. And is it okay if I share my screen for a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Del. Can I ask a question real quick? Just totally
okay,
curiosity.
Just let me say this. And
go ahead.
Just very quickly, what Jordan just said, I absolutely agree. It is on me to prove that it is in fact a miracle kind of thing or not. But remember, premise one is just a conditional. It's saying if the shroud is medieval, then it can't be a miracle. So that's why that would be your claim. That's the way I kind of see it. But Jordan's right. If I were when I'm claiming it is in fact a miracle, that's on me to prove. And I haven't done that. So Tyler, go.
So just given what you said, Jordan, just a second ago, it sounds like you're connecting a miracle to God, right? Do you believe that a miracle can be performed without God existing? Or are those two things connected?
I think so. The way miracles are usually understood, it would be some kind of supernatural event caused by an agent of some sort.
Correct.
Now, whether that classifies as God depends on your conception of God. But I'd readily concede that if there is a miracle, it would mean that my conception of reality is not accurate, and the implications that would depend on the miracle and the entity that did the thing. Right.
Fair enough. So if Dell could prove that this is a miracle sufficiently for you, that would get you to change some aspect of your worldview.
For sure. If this were proven to, if this were demonstrated to be miraculous, in the supernatural sense, I'd probably stop being an atheist.
Okay.
You know?
Fair enough.
It kind of puts you in a corner, wouldn't it?
I would still be a skeptic. My skepticism is more baseline to me than my atheism. I've been wrong about God before. I'm happy to be shown I'm wrong now. If God exists, then I'll stop being an atheist. No problem.
Debate, you know?
Like,
I'm teasing.
I mean, I'm happy to change my mind. That's no problem. It's just I'm going to go where I think the evidence is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right on.
Well, let's get back to the first century. Jordan, you did say that you thought Bob Rucker's defense was ad hoc, and I wanted to hear from Dale about this, because Dale, you had a lot in this to respond to, and I want to hear your opinion on this.
Yeah, so in terms of the ad hoc claim, so first of all, Jordan is right in certain set that his model is based on certain inputs, right? So the whole starting basis is that carbon-14 dating. He knew in advance what that is, and he plugged that into his MCNP calculations, right? So that's a given type deal, right? One thing I might dispute though, it's not all given. So one of the reasons Bob thinks that he can make a rebutting defeater, which does carry with it a burden of proof on Bob Rucker's part. I don't go that far, but he would say, look, the slope, that 36 years per centimeter, was a fulfilled prediction on his part, because he didn't input that into the calculations. He input the carbon dates and did his thing, and it came out, and it just so happened to coincide with the known slope of the carbon dating. It's about 35.87 years per centimeter is what he got. So that's a fulfilled prediction. That isn't an input or an ad hoc element there. Go ahead.
I disagree with that characterization for two reasons. One, that is the thing he was trying to explain to begin with. So an ad hoc explanation is once like, I have a piece of data, here's an explanation for that piece of data. That's ad hoc, right? You need other pieces of data to substantiate your prediction. You don't get bonus points for making a prediction of the thing you already knew going in, unless it's like extraneous to your model in every respect. But the source of his neutrons, like how they're distributed throughout the body, all that sort of stuff, that is something there's no basis in physical reality whatsoever. There is absolutely no physical mechanism. There's no law of physics. There's nothing to ground this model in. It is supernatural from floor to ceiling. And so he could have made that distribution anything he wanted, and there is nothing to say it's wrong. So I'm not saying that he went through and finely tuned. I don't know. I wasn't there when he did it. I'm just saying I am not impressed that it matches the slope he was trying to match to begin with, because it's not grounded in anything. Now, I would be extraordinarily impressed if his prediction of the centerpiece, I think he predicts it would show up to be like 4,000 years in the future.
8,500 or something.
Yeah, okay. It varies by where you are on the thing, by the distribution of neutrons. If you did a radiocarbon dating thing around the centerpiece and it did 8,000 years in the future, oh my goodness, I would happily tell Bob that I was wrong the whole time. But that would be a confirmed prediction. He doesn't have any of those yet.
Yeah, I'm just showing a visual image from the slides of what you're talking about. So this is what Jordan's talking about here, right? So based on Bob's model, if you were to carbon date like the stomach of the Shroud of Turin, you would get 8,500 AD, because the carbon-14 content has been injected artificially into.
Right. It would have more carbon-14 than something that were to die who had gotten its carbon-14 from the atmosphere. So it would basically violate one of the assumptions of carbon-14 dating to begin with, and this would show that had happened, right? And I have no problem with Bob having this idea. That's fine. Making hypothesis to make predictions that can be tested. That's the point of a hypothesis. That's all fine, right? The thing I object to is not the mere fact that he made this up, but that when he's talking casually to people and other people I've heard talk about it, they treat it as if it is this explanation that has all this confirming evidence because he did MCMP calculations, and it's not. It's just his idea. I mean, show me a piece of confirming evidence and then I will care about it. But why should anybody care about it until it's confirmed?
Yeah, and that's why I kind of tend to present this as just an undercutting defeater. I know that Bob disagrees, right? He says that slope is a fulfilled prediction. He also incorporates the Sudarium of Oviedo, because remember that carbon dated to 700 AD. That was not a part of his original model at all.
Right. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No problem. Yeah, you go ahead and talk, and I'll bring up my visual. You guys don't mind me sharing my screen all the time, right?
I don't mind at all.
Okay.
So it is true that if you put the Sudarium of Oviedo in a specific spot in the Jesus tomb model he came up with, the rock cut tomb, if he made this picture in like this 3D model space, right there, yep. And if you put the Sudarium in a certain spot, it dates to the 700 CE, or it accords with the other radiocarbon dating, right? Yep. And if you put it in a different spot, it would come up with a different date, and you could move it all the way around the tomb and get any date you wanted. The tomb, by the way, which he also made up, because we don't have that tomb anywhere. So what is the shape? Now, I understand he's basing it on what he thinks is plausible based on tombs of the time, but we don't know that that tomb shape is correct, and the geometry of the tomb would have a significant effect on the dating of the Sudarium. So that he doesn't get credit for that either, because it could have been any answer he wanted, even if he got lucky and said, I think it'll probably be next to it. And sure enough, it is next to it. Had it not, had he said, oh, it's probably 2 feet to the right and 1 foot this way, and it came up with the wrong date, he could have moved it, and he could have kept moving it until it had the right answer. And there's nothing to say he's wrong, because there's absolutely we have no information of where the Sudarium was in this tomb. None whatsoever. Even if you accept the whole idea, there is absolutely no way we could possibly know that.
Okay, so I don't go as far as you. I do see your point to an extent, right? I remember I kind of agreed with you, but there are some limitations, right? So because the shroud would be this way, head would be here, and like, so if you see on the this is the shroud, right? This is where the face is, these are the feet, kind of thing, right? And we know this from his model. And he's saying, well, the Sudarium was placed by itself. So Bob said in advance the most likely place would be somewhere around on this left bench, right? That's more probable in his mind, again, in advance of his model, kind of thing, as a place where it would be put. It wouldn't be put on the floor, for example. You're a bunch of Jews stepping on a bloody cloth. No, it wouldn't be on the walls or wouldn't be on the ceiling. So these would be falsifications. And in turn, it could have been thrown to the right bench, but that's less plausible. So Bob is saying, like, putting it on this left bench is the most plausible explanation. And it is interesting that oh, come on now. Oh, go ahead.
So I'm being facetious when I say it could have come up with any date. I mean, obviously the most radiation is at the chest, right? So I guess the most it could possibly get is that date, right? It couldn't be any date from negative infinity to infinity. But there is a wide variety of dates it could have had, depending on where it is in the tomb. And while I understand why he says, oh, I think it would probably be next to the face or whatever, like, there's not that isn't grounded in anything. He is not forced to put that anywhere. Now, if somehow we had a map of the tomb, we had a picture of it, I don't know, if we knew for a fact the Sudarium was in this spot and then it agreed, that would be a piece of confirming evidence.
Yeah, and I think I have to concur with what you're saying, right? So what he's basically saying is, look, we carbon dated it. It's in this range. He did 700 AD plus or minus 50 years. So that's what these yellow things are on the sides. Now, let's say we don't know that the Sudarium was in fact put here, right? We're just saying, well, that aligns with the carbon dating and it's a plausible spot. But maybe they threw it over here and then we would have a falsification. We don't know where the Sudarium was the exact spot. We're just saying, well, this is a historically plausible spot and seems like one of the more probable spots on this bench here, close by to the shroud. And guess what? It just happens to match to the carbon dating that they did for the Sudarium. So, like, that's kind of what this evidence at best proves there. So it's something. But
I mean, it's I guess it's not nothing, but it's not much. I will say though, one thing I want to reiterate again, that there are I deal with a lot of conspiracy theorist stuff. I debunk young earth creationists too sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very difficult sometimes to get a firm, like, something you could actually test from these sectors. To Bob's credit, that is not the case here. By golly, does he make some firm predictions. In fact, I think these predictions are so big that the 8,000 years in the future radiocarbon, I did some math and I should have put it in my notes and I forgot. But I think it is likely that you could test that without even doing radiocarbon dating. I bet you could just, like, take a detector and do counting at the beginning. Like, if you put it in a place where you're filtering out most of the background radiation, I think you could debunk this with a Geiger counter you could buy on Amazon. Like, so, like, let's make it happen, Catholic Church,
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm totally with you. Like, dear, sneak in a Geiger counter. I don't know if you can. I've never been there, but yeah, like, let's test it. This is something that you can easily falsify,
right,
or not, and it would be incredible. So, okay, well, there is one thing that I wanted to, one ad hoc thing that I heard you mention about the verticality of the thing. And you seem to think that this is an ad hoc thing on Bob's part. It's not. This is more data input, right? Because scientifically, I should bring that up. I have a visual image, but it's been scientifically proven through STIRP that one of the physical features of the shroud images is that they were vertically encoded, either a rectilinear or a curvilinear encodation path. And that's one of the ways we can rule out direct contact or gas emissions, because you'd have these wider, like mask of Agamemnon effects, wraparound effects, right? So this is more data input. We know that whatever mechanism made the shroud images encoded it in this vertical direction. And that's why he's positing the vertical directions. And what he said, last part, sorry, I'm talking too much, but if the protons are vertically aligned, that's what causes the image, these charged particles, and the electrical discharge is what actually colors the fibers. Then through the law of conservation of momentum, Bob said, if I'm remembering properly, the neutrons would be going the opposite way. So again, one's vertically up, it would be going vertically down. That's why they're vertically.
So, okay. Radiation doesn't act that way. When radiation is emitted from a particle, it is emitted in a random direction. And so the aggregate of that is it goes in all directions. That's what actually happens with radiation in real life. And so what that should have been a disconfirming piece of evidence right there, but it's not. Why? Because he can invoke magic. He can say, well, it's vertically collimated. Why is it vertically collimated? No good reason. It just is. Like, it is because that's what I would like it to be. It is vertically collimated because I would prefer if it were vertically collimated so it can do this image thing, right? What is this? What is the source of his neutrons? It is from deuterium fission. How did the deuterium fission? Doesn't matter. There's deuterium in there. It'll fission somehow. I'm sure God will take care of it. Like, this is the kind of ad hoc nature of his hypothesis. There's no mechanism. There's nothing there.
So definitely the initial mechanism is supernatural, right? During that first femtosecond and stuff like that. And yes, I admit that usually radiation is isotropic, right? It radiates in all directions equally. Although Bob is saying, well, I mean, it's not always true. Even in the natural world, we have coherent radiation, right? Lasers, for example, right? So, and when we're talking about a supernatural act during the resurrection, I don't, that God had to make it vertically in order to encode those high resolution images.
But God doesn't need protons or neutrons to encode an image. Why would he? Why? Like, if your answer is, well, they had to be vertical to encode an image, you don't need these to encode an image. God could just change the elemental makeup of the shroud if he really wanted to. He could directly do it if he wanted to. So, like, it's not like God is restrained by using protons,
But he's not restrained to use protons. Like, why not use it? By the same token, it's the same thing, right? Like, that's the way he did it. Okay.
Why there is no mechanism to make them vertically collimated. It's not like, hey, I think this specific thing, this mechanism which is known and understood, and it is a fact of nature that we deal with. This mechanism was triggered. Say, for instance, deuterium did fission in nature all the time, right? And all it needed was this much energy, and when it does that, it emits vertically collimated radiation. That would be better, but it doesn't do that. Right. So, like, that is just another piece that is contrary to what we would expect. Does that mean it's wrong? I mean, maybe there is exotic physics or miracles at play. But again, that is just another reason why we should be reluctant to accept his model, because it's just another thing he's asking us to believe. Excuse me. He's asking us to buy vertically collimated neutrons. He's asking us to buy the protons doing this thing, but only affecting the whole way around. Even though the protons are coming from this way, the dehydration is all the way around evenly, but only there's like a lot of pieces that he's just asking us to swallow.
Yeah, but and my main point when I started this is it's not ad hoc, right? So in terms of all the way around, it's the feature known as cylindrical uniformity. I don't believe that's been proven yet, but some researchers have claimed to find it, and his model would be consistent with the 360 degree thing there. So it's not ad hoc. He's not just making it up. There's data from STIRP studying Shroud, and then he's inputting that into his models, as you said. Yeah, like, okay, it's got to be vertical because we know that the Shroud of Turin had a vertical encodation path. Now, is that a normal, natural mechanism? No, like you said, when I don't understand the process, but deuterium, I understand the protons and neutrons come out of that from the entire body, not just the body surface. And that should be isotropic, if naturally speaking, but for whatever reason.
You guys been on Bob Rucker for
Time to move
for a
on.
while now. I think it's time to move on. We beat that dead horse enough.
Real
Let's
quick.
move on. Go ahead, Tyler.
Well, I was gonna say we do have an audience question, and it goes
Sure.
back to and forgive me if I butcher this. So, Jarosla, did I hope I pronounced that right. Anyway, she asked about the slope. So, Jordan, you presented a picture of the slope where they put the points on for the dates, right? For the Shroud of Turin, and she is asking, is the slope present on the Sudarium?
That is an outstanding question. I don't know the answer to. I've heard Bob say that the Sudarium matches the radiocarbon dating. Like in his model, it'll be 700, and it's 700 in the dating. And I've seen the little picture, but I haven't seen like, and maybe he has. I've read most of what he's published, but it's possible I missed something.
Okay.
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Well, okay. So you're asking if there's a slope on the Sudarium. I haven't. So the radiocarbon dating that was done on the Sudarium, I couldn't find it published anywhere. I looked and couldn't find it. Doesn't mean it's not out there, but I didn't find it, and so I can't like dig into that to see. I would need to see the raw dates it gave, and even if you did that, like, because there's going to be a range, right? But unless they told you this one went here and this one went here and this one went here, you could arrange those any way you liked. So you could make a slope if you really wanted to, and it would just be something you're constructing. So the short answer is I don't know, and I'm not sure it's possible to know.
Okay, Dale.
Yeah, so I'm with Jordan. I don't think anyone's done it. Obviously, we've carbon dated it 3 times, or 4 times, but the 4th one was messed up. So there are 3 reliable times. It ranges 679 to about 710 AD, in and around that range. So yes, there are differences as to whether there's a slope. I don't know. I don't think Bob's worked on that at all. That question that I know of.
Okay.
So that's an interesting question.
Right on. Right on, guys. Also, I wanted to just tell our audience we are taking audience questions. If you would like to ask the panel a question regarding the Shroud of Turin, please put it in the comments. Put at Faith Unaltered so we see it. Also, super chats get priority. So if you would like to help us fund and get your question asked immediately, then send us a super chat and we will get to it as soon as we get it.
Well, I know you were super excited to get to the Sudarium of Oviedo, and that's probably the thing I'm least excited about. So we should do your thing.
Yeah, I was just gonna push us there because I think that will lead us into carbon dating too.
Okay.
I was gonna the big thing I was gonna ask here is how, because I'm a little confused. How are we getting the Sudarium and the Shroud being in the 1st century? That's where I'm really at. Are we saying because the carbon dating is a little mixed here, or we can't rely on the carbon dating? Is that why we're getting here? Because it seems like the carbon dating for the Shroud is different, and it seems like the Sudarium is different. So how are we actually getting here? I would like to see that point really expounded on.
Okay. So in the first place, so you do understand that the Sudarium proper, like the evidence from the Sudarium, doesn't directly prove that either the Shroud or the Sudarium date to the 1st century. We can't do that. At best, we have the first mention of it is 570 AD in Jerusalem, and since we can, and also we have the pollen study that, if it works, that dates it before 300 AD. So that's what we can do with the dating. It's either there or earlier, which is consistent with Jesus' time. Now, okay, well, how would we explain, how is it consistent with the 1st century date if we're getting a carbon date of 700 AD and with the Shroud 1325 plus or minus 65 years, whatever, right? So this is what me and Jordan have been talking about with Bob Rucker's model. If during the resurrection event, the Shroud and the Sudarium were irradiated with neutrons from the body during that resurrection event, this would affect the ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12 and put a whole bunch of carbon-14 in it to different degrees depending on where you are on the cloth, right? So that's why we're getting the slope. We're getting different dates, right? The Shroud sample dated to, maybe I should show the image again, dated to the 1325, but with the Sudarium, come on now. That would, because that was further away from the body, the source of the neutrons, it got less neutron irradiated, and therefore it's not as affected, right? So like see here with the body, right? So the neutrons go up and they affect different areas of the cloth. This is where they dated the shroud in 1988, and it gave a date around 1300s or something like that. But if they dated, the middle of the shroud, you would get this 8,500 date, or if you dated here, you would get this date, because different new levels of neutron irradiation are happening depending on where you date the cloth. And it's
basically his model is that there's more body mass. The body emits neutrons pretty much evenly through the whole body, and there's more body in the chest than there is by the feet. And so you get more neutrons equals more carbon-14 equals more thing. And
something
so
about that center mass thing, huh?
Yeah, and when the neutrons are bouncing around off of the thing, it'll irradiate the whole chamber to some degree, and that is how he gets the Sudarium. But pay attention to what's happening. Now another thing is being tacked on to Bob Rucker's, like with a one piece of radiocarbon dating that is shows it, or would say it's not first century. Oh, well, we're going to use Bob Rucker's to explain that. Doesn't have any confirmed predictions yet, but we'll use that. What about this other radiocarbon dating? Oh, well, Bob Rucker's hypothesis. Again, this is hypothesis that has no confirming data. And let's say hypothetically, we test it and or for whatever reason, we reject Bob Rucker's hypothesis. We don't like it. Is there any other explanation for this radiocarbon date? Did we just throw it out because it is no good?
Jordan, can I ask you a question? If it's okay, if David, did you get your answer, or are you still?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would love to see you guys go into this further. So carry on.
Okay, so Jordan, I have a question for you, because Bob has told me about what he's working on now with his calculations. He's going beyond, right? So he's, I'm not going to understand it, but it's something about acceleration. Okay, and this is he's going to give even more detailed things where he's going to be able to predict what the subsamples should have gotten. These aren't going to be inputs. It's going to be predicted by his model. Now, if that's true and it matches, those, it matches these subsamples, 16 subsample things, would you consider that a confirmed prediction, or is that an input? Like, I confess, I don't totally understand what you told me, but.
Okay. So to the best of my knowledge, and my knowledge is limited, the paper I found when they were talking about having gotten the raw data that they listed was a table of dates, right? They didn't tell like this piece was dated by Arizona at these coordinates in their sample, and this one corresponds to this. So just like, here's a plate of dates. Here's a bowl for Arizona. Here's a bowl for Zurich. Here's a bowl for Oxford. And so if we had those coordinates, and I don't know if that information even exists, but if we did, but Bob didn't know it, right? And he was like, here is the whole distribution for all these samples where it should be. And it mapped perfectly onto the thing, onto the coordinates. Basically, yes, that would be a maybe not conclusive, but it would certainly be a piece of confirming evidence. At that point, you would have something. That would be an opportunity for it to be disconfirmed, and it wasn't disconfirmed. Okay, that is not nothing for sure. But I don't think we have that.
Well, he's working on it right now. He's
not Bob's thing. I don't think we know where, like Arizona's date of 1249. I don't think we know where in Arizona's sample that was. I'm happy to be corrected. It wasn't in the paper I saw. Maybe we do have it. Maybe Bob has it. I don't know.
Yeah. He said he needs to confirm with Tristan about those details and stuff. So yeah, well, I will look. I just wanted to see that. So that'll be something to look out for when he publishes his results and kind of thing, and see what happens. So awesome.
But until that happens, I still maintain like we're putting a lot of weight on a basically one guy's idea. I mean, it's a testable idea, but it's an idea that has not yet been tested.
Well, bear in mind. Okay, so let me say this then about the car. So remember, I was clear in my opening presentation. Forget about Bob Rucker's theory. It's a great theory, and neutron irradiation would help explain all this stuff. But remember, it is you that has the burden of proof. I don't have to prove that it was neutron irradiated. We have the absolute proof that there is a systematic measurement error. Mm-hmm. We can't prove what that is empirically at this moment, right? You have your idea that you think it's based on thing. Bob has his idea. Hugh Ferry has his different idea about rogue contamination or something, right? So it's on you to prove that a natural explanation is true before we dismiss another explanation that's consistent with the first century.
So I don't think I necessarily need to nail down for certain what it is, but in order for me to say this shows it's not first century, let's go with the opposite. Let's say it was first century, and we're going to let's set Bob Rucker's explanation to the side for now. And let's say it was first century. How would we get to this? It seems to me, unless they are just lying, like if we go into conspiracy theory stuff, which I don't think anybody thinks, right? Then they measured this. Well, okay, nobody here at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there who believe a lot of things. But okay, so they measured this amount of carbon-14. So the question is, how did it get there? Now, if it were contamination, that is always a possibility. Perhaps it was just so thoroughly contaminated that it was first century, but it has so much later contamination that the average of those two things leads you in the 13th century. That is not impossible. But Bob Rucker himself has done math on this, and I haven't checked his math, and I'm going to assume he's right. And the number he came up with is 60% of the carbon would need to be contaminant and not original. And that's a lot of contaminant. That's the kind of contamination you could see with a microscope, right? And so, like, I can't say for certain that there isn't some, like, optically invisible contamination or something, but, like, that's seems like a stretch to me.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
No, I was just gonna let you respond, Dale, real quick, and then I was gonna try to shift it a little bit.
But I was just gonna shift it to the Sudarium evidence, and because I am interested. I know Jordan doesn't like it, but I am curious as to what you think. I mean, there have been various scientific studies that seem to link
Yeah, no, exactly. What I wanted to know before we jump off this, because we're still into the carbon dating thing, is Dale, you gave some undercutting defeaters, and I just wanted to know what Jordan thought about those undercutting defeaters.
Which defeater?
The ones he presented, the 5 he presented. I know he focused on the 2, but
okay, let me bring that up. We've been focusing on about the statistical one, right? So we've been talking about the whole time, but.
Yeah, what's the other one? That's the one I was
undercovering
thinking of.
Feeders. Okay. So conspiracy theories or measurement fraud, the general unreliability of AMS carbon-14 dating with linen specifically, only one sample. This is the invisible reweave, like that kind of evidence. And then this is the one we've been talking about, like Bob Rucker.
And where does this idea of beta analytics, these guys from Florida, where does that come in?
I think it would be under this. Yeah, it'd be number 2 kind of thing, right? Because they're basically saying, look, we would never carbon date anything unless it's a textile, unless it's a part of a multidisciplinary thing. They don't give this warning for anything. When carbon dating wood, bone, they don't give that warning. It's only with textiles they do. And this is the top lab in the world. So that there's something there, right? I think.
So, okay. So it's always important to understand the limitations of any dating method before you use it. For instance, you can't use radiocarbon dating to date the shells of like freshwater snails because of the reservoir effect. I won't go into what that is. It doesn't get its C14 from the atmosphere. Okay. So you can't do it. Right.
What about heart-shaped stones? I'm just joking. That's an inside joke.
Those, I guess under that guy's hypothesis, they were biological. So I don't know. That's insane. Someone can super chat and I'll tell you all about it. But in any case, so I would imagine, and I'm not them, I haven't read that statement, so I can't say for sure, but I would imagine the thing they're envisioning is linen could easily be contaminated by other things because it would readily absorb stuff. It might be hard to clean. And so for that reason, their results might not be as reliable as they otherwise would be. And I'd concede, like, I'm not going to say that the shroud was from 1260 because the radiocarbon dating said so. I don't think I can know that for sure. All I'm not relying on it to say it was from this year. I'm relying on it to say it was not 1200 years earlier, right? And I feel confident saying that only because the level of contamination that would be required would be exorbitant. Like, if the dating had been like, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. If the dating had been like, it dated to 200, okay, I could see how you get there with contamination, right? But 1200 seems too far to go with just contamination.
Yeah, when it's contamination, so I should clarify, right? What Jordan's meaning by contamination, he's talking about ordinary contamination. So this was one of the original things, right? So some people would argue for a bioplastic coating or like, smoke or tallow or wax and stuff. These kinds of ordinary contamination, it's been scientifically falsified. Like you could never get a first century date up to the medieval period. Or the Shroud of Turin, number one, it would be like double the weight. It would be extremely noticeably heavy. And in fact, it's quite light. Also, it'd be very brittle if you have like a bioplastic coating, whereas the shroud is remarkably, almost, I would even argue, potentially supernaturally flexible and pliable. Maybe I'm going too far with the supernatural stuff, but it feels like a t-shirt. That even whether the shroud is medieval or 2,000 years old, that's remarkable. Most textiles are more brittle or decomposed, or they're not as in good condition as the shroud. So
I would buy a Shroud of Turin t-shirt for sure.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know. I've been having issues with Tyler and Teddy about idolatry and veneration of images. So maybe hold off on the shirts. No,
So okay, were you ordinary contamination out? Is there like some other kind of contamination you're envisioning?
Yeah, so there are at least two forms of extraordinary contamination that have been proposed to date, right? So the other is Dr. John Jackson came up with carbon monoxide, and this was scientifically tested in 2008, and it was falsified. That would be a form of extraordinary contamination, but we know that's not what happened. So the only one left is neutron absorption, Bob Rucker's stuff. That's the other viable extraordinary contamination theory.
Okay. So it seems if Bob Rucker, if we say that Bob Rucker's hypothesis set it to the side, it doesn't seem like there's any other explanation on offer. It seems like it seems like if it's not Bob Rucker, then we should at least provisionally say that it is medieval.
I don't know, because even you were saying like maybe it's a Gaga particle, something an unknown.
I'm sorry.
I'm just making up stuff. A Gaga particle, that contamination, right? Like just because Bob Rucker's neutron irradiation isn't the mechanism, that doesn't mean, okay, well, there's got to be some normal natural mechanism that is consistent with a medieval date. It could be an unknown thing that is consistent with a first century date, right? So ruling out Bob's wouldn't prove that, okay, well, it's not first century.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. It could be some other kind of exotic unknown particle with properties that aren't clear, but that's the case for anything, right? Like you could, if you want to, you could invoke mysterious physics to explain just about anything you wanted, but it's not a question of can you have an explanation for this. It's what's the most plausible explanation with the fewest ontological commitments, and that's fancy speak for like the fewest things you have to believe in order to accept the thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so I know you know what that is. I'm just saying for the audience. I try not to use too big of words. So for other fellow engineers like myself. And it seems to me at that point you'd be having to believe a lot without any reason to believe it. Now that doesn't mean that you can never change your mind again if new evidence shows up. You could say, okay, provisionally I'm going to say it's medieval, but then we find that Gaga particle. Okay, but you can change your mind now. But like in the meantime, you should probably go with medieval.
Yeah, I think I would fully agree with what you just said if it's a random thing, right? So obviously this is where the totality of the evidence comes in. It's a lot more plausible to consider, just for the sake of for joking, the Gaga particle or whatever, or a supernatural unknown mechanism, when we do have evidence that the images are miraculous and we're factoring that in. And so when it's not in explanatory isolation, that might change the thing. But when it's an explanatory isolation, just the carbon 14, and we're just considering randomly that some unknown thing, I think what you're saying is right. We would prefer the naturalistic thing in a random context type thing. So yeah. All right, cool. Are you good, David, to move on to the Sudarium? Because I literally do want to
absolutely knock it out, guys. Because I pretty much got a lot of the questions I wanted addressed. So the Sudarium is it, I think.
All right, cool. Yeah, Jordan. So I guess I'll just, I don't know how much you studied. Was there anything that you found interesting or like convincing or that you want to challenge or?
Well, I do have some questions because I haven't looked into the Sudarium as much as I have even the Shroud. So when I was looking at the work that had been done on the Sudarium, and I can only read English, so that's a failing of mine, right?
Yeah.
But if it's not English, it's not science, right? So
I agree. Come on, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, no American chauvinism here. Spanish science is still science. But in any case, is there much in the way of peer-reviewed evidence about the Sudarium? I saw a lot of like stuff being written by professional scientists, but like I didn't see much that was peer-reviewed. Did you have a different experience?
Yeah, there are, well, not totally different, but there are a few peer-reviewed journals on the study of the Sudarium for sure, right? And I think I even linked to some of them in my blogs. So, for example, that X-ray fluorescence thing, I had Dr. Cesar Barta on my show, right? So this 2015 paper, and
yeah.
So he was explaining that as well. I think the morphological study, I need to look into it, but yeah, the answer is yes, there are.
Because I didn't find a whole lot. I found there was some, and the X-ray, I had seen that. I forgot about that. The X-ray one, and I'm going to resist the temptation to dive back into dating methods. I don't find the X-ray thing very compelling for the reason that it's a novel technique it's new in the realm of techniques. And if it's the same one I'm thinking of, it is measuring the damage of the cloth over time. Is that right?
No. So, okay.
This is a different one.
You're thinking of Giulio Fonte's X-ray dating. So this is another, we have 5 empirical dating techniques that date the shroud of the 1st century kind of thing, right? X-ray dating is one that Giulio Fonte worked on, but I'm talking about X-ray fluorescence, a spectral test. They detected the ratio of the limestone dust at the tip.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so yeah, I did see that one. That one is a paper I did find and had some notes on. So we can talk about the limestone since you just mentioned it.
Sure.
The paper itself is a new coincidence between Shroud of Turin and Sudarium of Oviedo. That's the paper I think we're talking about here. And like you said, they measure the calcium content of the limestone in the Sudarium and compare that to Calvary and also the Shroud, right?
Yeah.
And the headline basically is that it matches, right?
Yeah.
So in point of fact, though, so they measure the ratio of strontium to calcium is what they measured, and it's the units don't matter. The relative units is what matters. So I'm not going to get into the scientific notation. Doesn't matter. The important thing is they measured the cathedral limestone, the limestone of the cathedral that it's stored in. That was 2.43. The Sudarium, the stained area, measured to 0.63, and Calvary measured to 0.24. Right? Now, it is a true statement that 0.63 is closer to 0.24 than it is to 2.43. That's a lot of numbers. The Sudarium's limestone is closer in strontium to calcium to Calvary than it is to the cathedral. Now, I don't have a citation for this, but I'm fairly confident there are more sources of limestone in the world than Calvary and the thing. Citation needed, but I think that's fair, right?
Yeah.
And so far as I know, they didn't test anything. So I, as a layman, I have no idea what the strontium to calcium ratio is normally. Is it normally 0.63? Is it normally 0.24? Is it normally 10? I don't know. And they didn't tell me. And so far, like it, I struggle to find this very compelling because I have no idea what I should expect. I have no idea if this is anything unusual, right?
Yeah, well, so this is an objection Hugh Ferry raises, right? And thankfully, Hugh Ferry does cite another study, totally separate from the Shroud, done in southern Spain, and the ratios there were much more. They're off, but they're much closer than in Oviedo or northern Spain where they did it. So we have at least that data, but you are absolutely right. They didn't test other areas. Like what about North Africa? What would we get there and stuff like that? Now the reasoning for that, though, like I asked Cesar Barta about that on my show, and he was saying, well, look, the Sudarium has a known history. It was sealed in this ark kind of thing, so it wouldn't have been contaminated in North Africa or any other areas. And we know that the limestone comes from where it was originally from the tip of the nose is where this remarkable finding was, right? So he's saying that this doesn't affect or is not a factor because we don't have to worry about later contamination given what we know historically about it. So that's his answer.
That seems to be begging the question, though. I mean, if you assume that the Sudarium's history is as we know it, or is as it is reported, then this, right? But that's one begging the question that is correct, and it's also doesn't say anything about what happened to it before then. Like that seems like a big like thing to just swallow and just say, okay, that seems like a big shortcoming of that research.
Let me, if you don't mind me being awkward for like a couple minutes, I can look it up because I remember he said there was 3 different things, and this finding is particular to the original. If you don't mind me just being awkward and looking that up, or I don't know.
Sure. And while you're doing that, I can talk, since we mentioned the history. So the history, as I understand it, the first mention that we get is from 570, like you said. This is an anonymous pilgrim who is like talking about all his all the things he did, and he mentions almost offhand. It's like one sentence that the face covering of Jesus is in this cave too, and then he goes on, or it is said to be in this cave. Now, is that face covering our face covering? As far as I can tell, the guy never even saw it. So that we don't know that it is. We don't know that it isn't. Maybe it is, but we don't know that. After that, the next mention we get is 11th century, I think. Now, to be fair, in the 11th century, there's like 4 or 5 people. There's several people who recount stories of how it came from Jerusalem to Spain, and there's differences on timing, the exact route it took, like the years they're off. I mean, they're giving history from 600 or 700 years before them at that point. But in order for their accounts to accord with the radiocarbon dating, they say like somewhere around the late 600s. That's pretty well. I mean, it's a little bit earlier than the radiocarbon dating, but it's not that far off. And so about the time that we get like a clear mention of the Shroud of of the Sudarium of Oviedo, that's pretty much when it radiocarbon dates. So it doesn't seem, I don't know, it doesn't seem like that history is that much of a defeater to the radiocarbon dating.
Well, as Dale continues to look this up, I am going to compliment both my guests on their awesomeness. They've done really well tonight. Thanks, guys, for having such a great conversation. Jordan, I gotta say, I loved your old background better. The sheet is not doing it for me. I like the kids' drawings. I like that you showed that you were Mr. Dad from Virginia, because we're Virginians. But no, I did love that.
I do this for those said people because like they're like walking around in the background, so it lets them like not be exiled away from that. I'm in the middle living room, like I'm in, in the middle of the house, so it's very awkward when before the sheet was up. But
I loved it, man. But anyways, go ahead, Dale.
Okay, yeah. So just on the X-ray fluorescence, yeah, I was right. So he says, look, they can differentiate 3 types of conservation of the relics, so they can determine which come from original use, or during its veneration as a relic, and also during its veneration after the 13th century. And this is basically primarily on the historical records. So Mark Guskin is a world's expert. He is a historian specializing in the Sudarium of Oviedo. And, he's been on the show before, and I've linked to shows where he goes over all the original documents. So we have multiple independent attestation for this story. It's not just one story that they have, and there are like in the Gospels there are slight differences and that sort of thing, but there is this general agreement. So I would say that it's not just you just have one document, so like how do we know if that's true or not? There is some criteria of authenticity that apply to the historicity of the Sudarium, and that's why most people, not even shroud skeptics like Hugh Ferry, would really dispute that the Sudarium does go back and stuff like this. So
I agree that there's multiple sources. Am I correct in saying that aside from that anonymous pilgrim, that those sources are 11th century, 12th century in that time frame? Is that correct?
No, I think he mentions other
that's
ones.
I was looking at Guskin's post recent historical investigations on the Shroud of Oviedo, where he talks about the various accounts and like their differences and similarities, and he kind of constructs a model from the aggregate of those. It's possible I missed it. I'm a fallible person, so maybe there's something in here that isn't 11th century, but it seemed like they were all like 1100 or later.
Gotcha. I seem to remember one that was earlier or something, talking about traveling around the Mediterranean is how it was saying the journey went there. But
okay,
again,
if it is, I agree it's multiply attested. So I'm not even like. I mean, the radiocarbon dating says it's from 700-ish, right? Exactly. So, I mean, like, I would certainly not object to that. I guess the point I'm making is that it seems like these sources are telling us a history that goes back to 600s, 700s area, right? They kind of differ on the dates. It's understandable. I mean, it doesn't mean anyone. They're recording history centuries later, right? So they're going to get a couple things wrong. That's no problem. But like, it seems to not be that far off of the radiocarbon dating. The one outlier, perhaps, is the 570 date from that anonymous pilgrim. But again, we don't know that what they were talking about. He says it's a face cloth of Jesus, but I mean, we all know that there were plenty of fake relics of Jesus floating around the Middle Ages, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it's entirely possible this pilgrim went to a place and they had a face covering of Jesus in this cave over there. That doesn't mean that it was our face covering of Jesus, you know.
Gotcha. Yeah, and like I said, I can't really prove beyond that first instance that I do think is historical. I can't prove it did go back to first century, and so fair point. All right. Well, I really want to ask you about the forensic links, though, with the blood stains, and especially, yeah, like what's your take on those in general?
So, I looked and I couldn't find any experts who had like examined this, like not the experts who I did the publishing, like other experts critiquing it, basically. I couldn't find that. So it's hard. I try not to speak without any basis whatsoever outside of things that I understand. I have no idea how blood forensics works, so I can't really assess the evidence. It seems to me, just looking at it, like, first of all, you have to like manipulate the cloth a lot because it was like wrapped around a head. So like there's perhaps some subjectivity about how you would match those up. And while you might be able to say that this splotch is kind of like this splotch, I mean, they're not, and you wouldn't expect them to match exactly, but they don't match exactly. Yeah. I mean, even if it were true, they wouldn't match exactly, but the point still remains that, you know, two people, basically, you could have two different people bleeding on the Shroud of Turin and bleeding on the Sudarium and get blood tongue-tied. Get blood splatter or whatever that looks kind of similar, or you could get the same person to get it look kind of similar. So like, it's not nothing. I don't have a defeater for it because I honestly haven't found any contrary evidence. So
fair enough. If you don't mind, I'll kind of provide that like back and forth quickly. So you're absolutely right? Like, so what would Hugh Ferry reject? And he obviously says, look, it's not a perfect fit in the first place, which is true, and we wouldn't expect it because these cloths were, you know, by perfect fit, we mean like if you lay it out flat and then do an overlay technique or a superimposition image, there are differences in the bloodstains. But the forensic experts, like the two I mentioned here, they're saying, but it's sufficiently similar where we can conclude it covered the same person despite the differences. Now, I like that Jordan mentions this, and this is absolutely true. Even the Pro-Shroud forensic experts do admit that different faces can and do produce similar stains on different cloths at times. But the real counter here is it's the degree to which, right, that causes these forensic experts to say, no, this definitely covered the same corpse. So for example, with Caesar Barta, he did actual experimental studies using computer simulation analysis and his own daughter. So, yep, sorry for her. Hopefully it went well. But and he found that, look, with the crown of thorns, for example, there is a extremely high percentage, around 75%, of correspondence with the crown of thorns blood thing, right? So that's incredible. Oh.
Can I? Sorry, I hate it when people interrupt me, and I just interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No problem. This is a great talk. So go ahead.
I was just curious. Do you have in your presentation a picture of the Sudarium? Because we've shown a picture of the Shroud, but I don't know that everybody watching has seen the Sudarium. If you don't, I do.
Okay, yeah, show yours, because yeah, I didn't include a picture. I just assumed.
Sure. Yeah, I know. Before you mentioned it, I had never even heard of the Sudarium of Oviedo. So,
awesome. Thank you for.
Sure thing. So here is a picture. If you'll, that is what the Sudarium of Oviedo looks like. Make it bigger, perhaps. There it is. So yeah, this is what the rag looks like. Now I think this, if I remember right, this is the area they say like was on the front of Jesus' face. Is that right? I'm kind of quoting from memory here. One of these two is like the primary.
This right here would be like the tip of the nose type deal, right? And
yeah,
if you want it, it was folded in a weird way. Like if if you want, I can play like my video for people if you want to see how it was folded, because it's a precise way that it was folded. And the reason it wasn't just like wrapped around the head, because one of the arms has been proven to like block it. So they had to like fold it and then like refold it back around itself and then pin it with bone pins, which is what locked the ponytail on the Shroud Man in place. And but yeah, like it's up to you guys if you guys want me to show like Caesar's 10-minute video there. But yeah, it's up to you.
So
Okay.
I'm not an expert in blood spatters. So the way I would assess this is like, okay, let's say that this blood spatter analysis, they're kind of fuzzy, but they kind of match, and maybe it's the same person or whatever. Like, so on the one hand, I've got these blood spatter guys looking at this kind of fuzzy, the faint image on the shroud, and then some blood spatters don't really make a clear image, but there's blood spatters on there, and they're saying they match. And I've got that on the one hand. And on the other hand, I have 2 radiocarbon dates that tell me that these are centuries apart with no real good, like, if that was all I had, I'm gonna have to go with the radiocarbon dating, that's really where I stand on it.
Okay.
Now, I think I saw in your presentation the blood type thing, because that's come up before.
I did that. The reason, so I had it in red ink. If you want me to pull it up, because that I think we can't prove that it's human blood or that it's type AB anymore. I go with Kelly Kieris's take on that. So I included it because that's one of the claims in the literature. But it's, to my mind, it's we can't prove it at this point.
Okay, fair enough.
What did you make of this half blood stain? Because this is something that I found very persuasive on my end.
So at the end of the day, what you have here is you have a blood stain with, a hole in it. And then on the Sudarium, you've got a blood stain about the same size. But I mean, like, I don't know. It's just I see all these people making so much of this, and I don't know. Maybe I'm just biased. I don't know, but it just doesn't seem like that. It seems like it seems like a lot of like looking for patterns where they're.
Okay.
If they were 2 different people, I don't think it would be that crazy for you to have a blood stain that was kind of like a hole, and then for this other one to have a dot.
Well, I think it's also like the relative location, because the Sudarium, even though I don't have a picture of it, it has the corresponding epsilon. This is called the epsilon wound on the forehead. It's like a reverse 3 type thing. So it has a thing that fits into this. Then with this little blood drop right underneath, they also have this corresponding half blood stain that fits. So I think the context of the location also helps provide it. It's not like, oh, well, you have a small dot, then you have a donut thing. So like, well, there's more to it, I think.
That's assuming that the people who publish on it are correct in the orientation and how it maps from one to the other. So it's conditional on them being correct in the positioning, and then also you've got this overlap.
Fair enough. All right. I don't know anything about the pollen thing. That's more related to dating the Sudarium.
Right. So pollen gets thrown about a lot when you're talking about the shroud or the Sudarium or anything related to it. And you said it, so that they don't go down. But aside from Max Frey, who did try to go down to the very specific species, and I don't think most botanists agree that you can do that reliably. You went down to the genus and you point to that being in burial oils and stuff, but that's not the only context in which those things existed, right? So like though that genus of pollen exists in other contexts in other areas, it's not unique to Palestine, it's not unique to the 1st century, and so it doesn't seem diagnostic of it being pre-3rd century or being Palestinian for that matter.
Well, don't forget. So this pollen grain is entrenched in the blood kind of thing. So we know it got on there originally. It's not later contamination. Okay. We also know that this is a specific. Oh, son of a gun! This is a specific type. It's, I don't know how to say this, entomophilus. This just means, look, this is spread through insect pollination or something like that. It's not spread through the wind, right? So it's not something that could just blow onto the shroud. It was something that was deliberately put onto it, entrenched in the bloodstains. And obviously this, I'm assuming you agree, the Sudarium did cover a dead corpse or a head of a human being. It's not artwork like you may think the shroud is, right?
I don't know, but I'm happy to concede that for the purposes of this discussion.
Okay, so if that's the case, then I think the most reasonable explanation is, look, this was used to cover a bloody dead head, and in that context, the fact that these botanical pollen grains were put there deliberately, and they were happened to correspond to certain resins, gums, and oils that were only used up to the Great Crisis of the Roman Empire or earlier, I think the most likely explanation is to go, yeah, it was put on as part of a burial custom or something like that. Yeah,
I don't know about the whole burial custom thing. I'd have to look into that. I do know that it's not like the Roman Empire disintegrated overnight, and I mean half the Roman Empire existed until like damn near millennia afterwards.
Forever. We're
That's
still looking for the lost Fifth Legion.
Well, see, and I don't know if you know Roman history; it's a hobby, but like in the
I
third
love some Roman history.
There you go. So you know about the Great
Pretty
Crisis,
fantastic.
third century. This is when classical antiquity ended, right? So, and basically the empire was being attacked by barbarians. It was falling apart. You had the soldiers kind of killing all the emperors. So because of this chaos for about half a century during the 200s AD, there was drastic changes to the Roman culture and way of life that led it to what we call late antiquity. So this particular burial custom we do know was stopped being used after this period.
It seems like so you're assuming that the way this pollen got on there is as part of a burial custom. And so if you are correct that this pollen got on there as part of a burial custom and that custom ended in the 3rd century, then that would be a piece of evidence. It wouldn't be conclusive, but it would be a piece of evidence, right?
Yep.
But so that's what I'm saying. It's not conclusive. It is a piece of evidence in one column. I don't think it's dispositive. I don't think it's like I don't feel forced to conclude that it's pre-3rd century because of this. And given its history, the only history we know starts in the 7th century, and that's where the radiocarbon dating is. And it would be one thing. Say, for instance, we knew this pollen ceased to exist after the 3rd century. Like, if for somehow we knew that, well, then it's showing up prior to that. Like, that would be good evidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the reality we live in.
Right on.
And I just want to point out, yes, how much I like.
You had you had the last response, so go ahead.
That's SPQR right there. That's how much I like Roman history.
Well, that's because you were a soldier and
that
you had
too.
this natural leading towards stuff like that. So, but no, thank you for your service too. Guys,
that's everything on mine.
Yeah, you know, and we do have some audience questions which I want to get to after you guys give a quick closing. Tyler, do you have anything, buddy?
No, I mean, I've enjoyed the discussion. We are, I think, 2 hours worth of gold here, guys. And so I love the way you've interacted with each other. And I do want to get to the audience questions, but I do want to give you guys closing statements as well. So if you're thinking of questions, our audience, please get them to us. Put either at Faith Unaltered before your question or at Real Seekers. Also, if you would like to give a super chat, this will be the last time that I promote it. Go to the Faith Unaltered channel. You cannot do it from Real Seekers. So if you would like to help us fund our channel, go to Faith Unaltered and you can send us a super chat from our YouTube channel. But Dale, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you so much again. Like this, not even giving BS to flatter people. This was a great conversation. I knew it would be from watching Jordan's videos. I disagree with some of his take, but I especially because this is new, I think you did a great job. So I'm going to be linking to his videos in my blog. Please watch them. And as well, Bob Rucker wrote a 23-page response to all of the points that Jordan made. So go to my blog and read Bob Rucker's response to all of that as well. So yeah, this was a great conversation. Look, I think we were working together, mostly trying to figure out what's true. We conceded points in fairness to truth. It wasn't all about, oh, I've got to win at all costs. So I love this conversation. I thought it was great.
Right on. Thank you for that, Dale. And Jordan?
Yeah, so at the bottom, under the chat where you've been asking where you super chat, right under the S for say something, there's a little dollar bill. It's got the money sign on it. That's where you super chat. So Anyway,
Thank
so
you for that.
that's some instruction there and how you throw money to get your questions to the top. So I agree with everything Dale just said. And since he already talked about how awesome everybody was, I'm going to talk about something else. I think that skepticism is super important. I think that the world would be a better place if people are more skeptical and just basically required evidence for claims. And so I think the right approach to this is to try to set aside what we would like to be true and just focus on what the evidence tells us. Even if the Shroud of Turin is not the authentic burial shroud of Jesus, even if it's not miraculous, it doesn't mean God didn't exist. Doesn't mean the Bible suddenly poofs away and disappears. So I don't think anybody is like should be committed to one side or the other. We can just look at the evidence as it appears, and the evidence that we have are the only firm scientific methods we have to date things tell us that it is not first century. They have flaws, as we've discussed at length. But I think that the balance of the evidence is to this not being the authentic shroud of Jesus, since that's why I believe that.
All right. Thank you so much, Jordan. Guys, we will go ahead and transition into the last segment of the debate, and that will be our audience questions. And so the very first one we have is from Ontangelo Garasso, and he asked, Real Seeker's question to Jordan: how did the artist make this image?
Well, I don't. I'm not committed to the artist hypothesis. I mean, it might be true, it might not be. I don't know how the image was made. We talk about this shameless plug in episode 3 of the thing we did. If you want to see my thoughts on it, but the conclusion is like maybe it's 2. I know one of them. Watch all 3, then you'll find out. But like. I don't know how the image was made, but critically, I don't know doesn't mean therefore I do know, and it was this. I don't know means and only can mean I don't know.
Fair enough. Dale, any follow-up to that?
Yeah, I think okay, so I think it's fair enough. Yeah, if you say that you don't know, that's fair enough. You got to be honest and not try to make stuff up and that sort of thing. One thing I would just clarify, when he says artist, that doesn't necessarily mean like a traditional painting. Like it could be an artist. So did you mean it in the wider sense with your answer, or were you specifically talking about painting?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I was surprised at when I looked into the shroud was the good evidence against like a brush painting. I think that the lack of meniscus marks, the lack of flooding, the lack of things being glued together. Like I think that there's strong evidence that this was not like a artist dipping his paintbrush. Like I don't think that. I think that's pretty much disconfirmed. Now, is there some other extremely clever way an artist might have done it? I don't know. But like, so that's what I meant when I said I'm not committed to the artist thing. The artist, like with a paintbrush thing, I think that's
fair enough. Yeah,
there's good evidence against that.
I guess, yeah. So just giving my sort of take, I would also concur with all the other known artistic methods, whether it's powder rubbing or a dusting technique. I saw in Jordan's comments, someone talked about Breezy and Craig's dusting technique. These all have similar problems. A scorching method, whether you look at Colin Berry's toastograph hypothesis, or one of the Delfino's things, or even proto-photograph, like Nicholas Allen gives it was a primitive photograph type thing. I think that these all have similar problems where they have been scientifically falsified. They can't explain all of the shroud's physical and chemical properties. So yeah, we can rule them all out, I would say.
Okay, right on. All righty. So the next one isn't necessarily a question; it's more of a statement, but it made me come up with a question. And so our good friend Teddy says the shroud, of course, has sustained water damage on 2 separate occasions and been in 2 fires, a lot worse than smoking near a sample to be tested. And so a little bit of background: she had commented before this that you want to keep these test subjects clean. Like you guys talked about earlier, there's very extensive cleaning that goes into. And so what made me think of a question was Teddy's comment. And so my question is to both of you guys. Dale, I'll ask you, and then Jordan, if you'd like to follow up to that, that would be great. But given the fact that there has been significant damage, it seems like, to this shroud, would that affect the carbon dating results that we have?
Yeah, well, obviously it depends where the sample location came and what came from and what treatment that had. Obviously, there has been some findings that area has been affected. And I was talking to Pam Moon the other day, and she actually went to the Oxford labs and got access to their photos, and there is a difference. There is stuff on it. There is some kind of contamination. Even Walter McCrone and others have confirmed that. Now, the main question for me is: were the cleaning processes that used sufficient to take care of that, so that it wouldn't be an issue? And obviously, people who believe in the invisible reweave, Teddy herself, she will want to say no, it was insufficient. Bob Rucker, on the other hand, would say no, it was sufficient. They even Oxford, they put it in sulfuric acid and other acid, and to the point where 50% of the material of these fibers was gone. To Bob's mind, that gets rid of the contamination. So I don't know exactly where I stand. I guess because I lean in Bob's favor, I would lean in that direction, but I'm not certain. Like there are findings of contamination in the carbon-14 sample, so it's just a question: do you think the cleaning process was sufficient or not?
Okay, Jordan.
So the smoking thing, it's possible that the smoke from the fires deposited some contaminant onto the shroud. So like it's in a smoke, some of the smoke gets entrained in the fabric. But you come back to the quantity that would be needed. So it's not that I'm saying that there is no contamination. Of course there's contamination. Like this thing has been fondled by people for centuries, right? Of course there's contamination. The question is, did the cleaning procedures take apart, and how much would the cleaning procedures need to miss in order to turn a 1st century cloth into a 14th century cloth? And the answer is an truly baffling amount, right? Like you'd have to be accusing them of incompetence on the highest order to get that much contamination. So the smoke specifically, Bob Rucker has looked at that, and I think, quoting from memory, I think it was 80% of the carbon would have to be from the smoke and not as opposed to like.
So there. What you're saying is there would have to be some serious neglect on the part of the people cleaning this piece of fabric.
So I agree. So the problem, as I understand it, the problem with the smoke would be that it would be depositing carbon into the thing in a way that would be hard to get out. And I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm not saying that because the bottom age of the shroud is 1190 something, that doesn't mean it wasn't made in 1150. I'm just saying it wasn't 1st century. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, yeah. Fair enough. All right, so you guys touched on this next question a little bit. If you want to skip it, I think you guys gave significant answers to this, or if there's something else you would like to add that maybe you thought of, since that time, feel free at this point. But SJ says, how do you explain the vanillin, pollen, burial ointments, and limestone from the 1st century Jerusalem? Jordan?
So we talked about the pollen and the burial ointments and the limestone. The vanillin we haven't mentioned. So Ray Rogers was a shroud skeptic who firmly believed, after being persuaded by Joe Marino and his wife, that the invisible reweave hypothesis was correct, and he published some papers about it. And one of the things that he published had to do with the amount of vanillin on the shroud, namely that there wasn't any. And the vanillin is a volatile compound. You know it from vanilla. And basically, his argument was that the amount of time since the 14th century would be insufficient to remove all of this vanillin, right? And so therefore, because there's some vanillin left, I believe, I'm not going to try to quote the percentages, I'm not going to remember them, but the point is there's some vanillin. There should be some vanillin if we're 14th century. There is none. Therefore, it's not 14th century. That's his argument. Now, how I would answer that, I talked about this in first episode. Shameless plug. So there's a lot of problems with this. First of all, it is strongly sensitive to heat. The amount of heat this thing has been exposed to over time has a huge impact on the rate that this vanillin goes away at. And this thing's been exposed to 2 fires. Now, he tries to answer this, and he believes that the insulating property of linen is sufficient to that wouldn't be a concern. But I mean, this is something you can't just ignore. Not to mention the fact that there's issues with it. That the chemical treatments that have been happened, differing chemical treatments from the different samples he looked at. I don't think it's as straightforward as saying there is no vanillin, there must be vanillin, therefore it's 14th century.
Gotcha. Dale?
Yeah, so I think Jordan did a great job kind of summarizing what this was a finding by Ray Rogers. He also he compared the shroud textile to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and apparently they were on a microchemical level similar on this basis. I don't use this argument myself. I've heard a lot of criticisms that I haven't been able to find answers to myself. So I tend not to use this. Now, I am partial to Giulio Fonte's, because this is one of the 5 empirical dating methods that allegedly show that the shroud is 1st century. And there are 4 other ones by Fonte. And I do think on a balance of probabilities, I'm partial to them. I know that Jordan mentioned they're new, but I don't think that alone says anything. I mean, they used dozens of control samples and that sort of thing. If you believe the carbon dating was new, it was only 10 years old when they dated the shroud. It was AMS, right? So just because it's new, that doesn't mean anything, especially when they have control samples. And think about it. With Giulio Fonte, he's got 4 different methods based on the in a nutshell, the degradation of the shroud textile, right? It degrades in various ways over the centuries, and that's how you can kind of date it, he's trying to say, right? But what are the odds that all of these things, if it is just some unreliable method and it happened to get a 1st century date, why would all 4 just happen to overlap and be erroneously overlap on the 1st century? That seems like we're just trying to dismiss the data. I think that there's something there. And Fonte allows for. Do you want to talk, Jordan?
Finish what you're saying, please.
He allows for very wide uncertainty levels. We're talking on the order of 400 to 500 years. So he's allowing for a lot of flexibility because his methods haven't, those calibration curves, they haven't been tested on lots of things. He tested about a dozen. So we need more to have the certainties better. But even if you allow the plus or minus 500 years or whatever, that's not medieval. It can't be medieval. So yeah, I think there's something to that. In terms of the pollen, barrel ointments, and limestone, we've kind of covered that stuff. The one thing I would say is that even if you grant everything I said about these things, none of that proves it's 1st century. It's consistent with the 1st century, but there's nothing about the barrel ointments that proves, oh, well, it is 0 to 180 to 100 AD. So yeah, I'm not sure what you mean about that, but yeah.
Can I respond to the dating thing real briefly?
Yeah,
sure.
Go ahead.
So it's true. So it being new does not in and of itself mean it is false. However, what it does mean is it's not tested. It hasn't been vetted. And radiocarbon dating is a good example. Over the decades, scientists have found regions where it doesn't work. They discovered the reservoir effect. So now we know that if we get, you can test a snail that like you killed yesterday and it'll date to like 1,000 years ago, right? It just doesn't work in that region. And that kind of testing hasn't been done with these new methods. They are an interesting idea. And perhaps these methods will be vetted in future as carbon dating has now been vetted to now. And it will come up with things that retroactively mean his results were good, right? But I don't think that we should overthrow a extremely well-established and well-understood method for a novel one that was created essentially to measure the shroud. Degradation could come from all kinds of sources. It has to do with the storage temperature, it has to do with the acidity, it has to do with the humidity, it has to do with all kinds of things that could be confounding factors. And I think it's premature to rely on them.
One thing, Jordan, if you don't mind me, just a quick question on this, because I find it interesting. So with the cumulative effect, right? So one of my main criticisms here about the carbon dating is we provably do not have this required 95% degree of certainty because of because of this issue and stuff like that about the new dates and stuff. But on the other hand, with Giulio Fonte, when he gets all 4 of his methods combined, we do arrive at a 95% degree of certainty that within those wide uncertainty levels, it does date that way. So like, what do you make of this 95% degree of confidence that he claims all of his methods cumulatively allow us to say? What do you think on that?
I'm not very impressed with brand new methods that were invented just for the shroud coming to the answer that it's authentic. Like that's not that impressive to me. Should the literature, should the people in the field, the experts of the field, take his research, vet it, and authenticate it? Like, okay, he comes with this 95 confidence level. How confident should we be in his confidence level? We don't know what his calibration curves are. We don't know, like, how did he arrive at this kind of error? These sort of things are the sort of things that need to be vetted in peer review, and they have not yet been. I understand he thinks he is justified in it. I would like other people, not the person who made up the method, to say this too.
Fair enough. Gotcha.
All right. Guys, we got our first super chat, and David sent it. So
that doesn't.
I don't think it counts. Yeah,
it wasn't a super chat; it was a super sticker to show
sticker.
everybody how to do it.
That's right. That's right. All right. Our next. So, guys, we have 5 questions left. The majority of them are for Jordan, and so I'm going to go a little bit out of line here, or out of order. Gur asks, Faith Unaltered, question for both. If the Shroud of Turin was proved to be coming from Jesus, what does that prove exactly? Dale, I'll let you go first, and then Jordan, if you want to follow
up. So just in and of itself, that it came from Jesus, I mean, I think that's remarkable. I mean, just from a historical perspective, one of the most important figures in human history and that sort of thing. I think I could make an argument for a miracle based on the circumstances, but I would need to include additional things. So, yeah, really for me, this is what I was kind of saying, is that the dating is not where it's at for me. I care more about the scientific properties or attributes, what I call these minimal relevant features of the shroud images. And that's what I base my argument that it's a miracle on. It's not so much that it belongs to Jesus. It's clear. It clearly is meant to represent Jesus of the Gospels. Everyone agrees, whether you think it's an artwork or whatever, it's meant to be Jesus of the Gospels. It's got the crown of thorns, the wound in the side, all that good stuff. So that's enough to prove a miracle to me, whether or not it actually wrapped around the historical Jesus or not. So,
okay, Jordan.
Well, if we could definitively prove that this wrapped around the historical Jesus, that might finally shut up the mythicists, and so we wouldn't have to deal with them anymore. And that alone, you know what? Honestly, if I could pick any result, that would be the result I could pick, just so Richard Carrier would shut up. That would be great.
I didn't even think of that. Brilliant. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to devote all my time to that now. Okay.
All right, guys. So the next question is from Joe. Does Jordan have an issue with the fact that the C14 raw data was not released early on and was only released in 2017 because of the FOIA request? Begs the question, what were they trying to hide?
So I don't have a good feel for how common it is to release the raw data. I don't know. But I don't think we need to go to any weird conspiracy theory to say why they would have hid it. Scientists are people. They don't like being embarrassed. Nobody likes to say oh man, I was very publicly wrong. So I think that's just all you need to hypothesize for why didn't they want to say it? I don't know. I'm not in their heads. I don't know why. Yeah. Maybe they just didn't feel like it. But a plausible explanation would be boy howdy, it sure would be suck if every single person on the planet knew how demonstrably wrong I was. Not wrong that it was not first century, just wrong that my dating methods were wrong.
Right. Dale?
Yeah, so in the first place, I just want to point out Joe Marino. Thanks for listening. He is one of the shroud experts in the world. He invented the invisible reweave hypothesis. So this is not just a nobody. So in terms of his question, I do think that I disagree with Jordan. I think we do make something out of it. I think this is, if the shoe was on the other foot and we found out pro-shroud scientists were hiding this, I do believe that most atheists would automatically kind of, see, you guys are hiding. You have this motivation to fudge the data and stuff like that. So I do think on this end, they were fudging the data. Why would they eliminate these 4 outliers? Well, it's because by doing that, that's the only way they could get this 95% degree of confidence. And I know Jordan might not know about the goings on, but Joe Marino has a great book about the politics behind the carbon-14 dating. And this has been confirmed by them. There was basically AMS carbon dating was competing with 2 other new carbon-14 dating methods at the time. it was by dating the shroud that it became established in the scientific community and made it famous and stuff like that. Whereas beforehand, it was kind of nebulous and stuff like that because it was competing with these other methods. So I think that there was a motivation. I do believe that they probably fudged the data for the purpose of, that's the only way they could claim this 95% degree of certainty. And in fact, one of the carbon-14 scientists in the paper in Nature said that they should not publish this 95% degree of confidence because it's not substantiated by the scientific method. Nature published it anyways against the expert himself recommending not to publish it. So I think there's something a little bit weird going on.
I mean, p-hacking is a known problem in the scientific community. And if it's not 95%, nobody wants to hear it. Doesn't matter that there's other confidence intervals. Like 90% is also a confidence interval that's just not as good a confidence interval as 95, but it's 95 or GTFO. So I mean, I think it's like, I would not be surprised to learn that it was like, oh man, it's 94%. Should be Boston. It was 95. Scientists are human. They're flawed people just like we are. And so like, do I think that demonstrably the results are flawed? Absolutely, they're flawed. Are they flawed enough for it to be first century? I don't think so, but I totally agree they were flawed.
Cool.
Right on. All right. Two more questions after this one. So Teddy asked, how have C14 dates yielded future dates? Incompetent somewhere or something is not quite as firm as to how reliable C14 testing is. So the question, how have C14 dates yielded future dates? Jordan?
Have they? I mean, I'm not aware of one.
Okay.
Are you aware of one, Dale?
Yeah, well, she's talking about like examples that young Earth creationists like Kent Hovind will bring, where they carbon date snails and they date to the future, or their dating is way off, or something like that.
They don't date to the future; they date to the distant past.
Okay, I think she was citing a specific example where one comes from the future. It doesn't matter. The question here is about it is a fact that even Jordan admits, everyone admits that carbon-14 dates are way off at times, right? And that's where they usually comes in with contamination of some sort, like carbon-14 is contaminated in or something like that, or it's leaked out in these snails examples, and that's why we get off dates kind of thing. So competence, I don't know that there's it's just a matter of working out like how do we detect when there's contamination or not and stuff like that, right? So yeah.
Would something similar, just out of curiosity, and Jordan, I'll let you answer this too. What comes to my mind is whenever I was researching like the Young Earth, Old Earth series that we did a few months back, that we have rocks, volcanic rock, that we know when these rocks were formed, they've been carbon-14 dated to sometimes even I'll be nice, 10,000 to 100,000 years in the distant past, right? Is that similar to what Teddy's talking about here, or?
Yeah. So I don't know that those were carbon-14 dated. There are other sources of radiometric dating, and usually, I think for the lava rocks, the one that they usually use for those is potassium argon dating.
Okay.
Or argon dating. So what's going on there? It's young Earth creationism. Well, that used to be young Earth creationists. So it is true that you can take a rock from like Mount St. Helens, is the one they love to do.
Right.
And it's a rock. We know when this rock was formed, and we date it, and we potassium argon date it, and we get a date 10,000 years ago or whatever it is, right? So it's wrong. That is kind of like you have a truck scale, and you sprinkle some salt on it, and it gives you a weight of 0.1 kilograms. Oh my goodness, this truck scale's useless. We should just throw it out. No, of course not. What's happened is you've used it way outside the bounds of where you would expect it to be accurate. There's their potassium argon dating. You're measuring the potassium 40 decays into argon, and argon is a gas. And so the assumption in the model is that it all degasses before it crystallizes. And then at that point, all the gas accumulates. But that's never completely true. You are likely to capture some amount of gas, but that gives you a static amount of air. So let's say it's 100,000 years worth of air. Well, that matters a lot if your sample is from the 70s. It doesn't matter at all if your sample's 500 million years old. Mm-hmm. So like, you just have to use the right dating method for the.
Not only that, but if heart-shaped stones, they used to be
hearts.
Hearts, yeah.
Yeah, that That he's referencing a debate I did
I'm
with
sorry, I just have
Guts
to.
Gibbon with a guy, a mudflood guy, who believes that every rock that looks vaguely like a heart is in fact a heart. And you know that island off the coast of Italy that looks like a dolphin? Yeah, totally was a dolphin.
So he just thinks they like.
I'm gonna leave that one there. That's funny. So really, like this dude, like
Dude,
you guys
I'm
are being
sorry.
serious.
Poor Jordan. Poor Jordan.
I
Oh,
held it
man.
together as hard as I could. If you would like me to come on, or I actually know a guy who does radiometric dating like as part of like his job.
Uh-huh.
If you would like to me, or I can probe him with some questions on radiometric dating. I love talking about radiation, anything related. So
I
happy
think
to
that
do
would be fun. That'd be really fun. Okay, so we have 2 more questions left, and the first one I'm going to ask it doesn't have really anything to do with the shroud, and you'll see why I saved the last question for last. And so Altangelo asks Jordan, are you also a skeptic that naturalism is true?
It's a good question. I am not a philosophical naturalist, so I don't I don't say a priori there cannot be anything supernatural. The way I would view it is more like the natural. So we all agree that we live in a world with a natural component. Things usually follow the laws of nature when nothing is monkeying with them.
Nah. No, I'm just kidding.
We disagree on the extent to which something is monkeying with them. I say 0, you say something not 0.
Sure.
But we agree that we live in a natural world to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Now, so I would say, okay, that's where we start. And then the theist wants to add a supernatural layer onto that. And I would say, okay, if you want me to believe there's supernatural, that's what I need evidence for. So am I a skeptic that naturalism is true? I'm not a skeptic that the natural world exists because I can see it with my eyeballs, right?
Yeah. Right on. Right on. All righty. So in the
You're
last,
not going to ask me to speak for.
well,
Jordan?
you know what, Dale? I'm sorry. I've been off on you tonight. I apologize, Dale. Go ahead.
So yeah, I think I'm just going to repeat and refer to Jordan. I think he answered it quite well. Just be aware that he was lying the whole time. He is metaphysical naturalist for sure.
True. And you would know better than I would.
Of course.
All right. And the last question, where can we find the debaters? Are they on YouTube, Twitter, or etc.? So Jordan, shameless plug. Dale, shameless plug. Jordan, go ahead.
Sure. I run the Reason to Doubt podcast or YouTube channel. If you Reason to Doubt, just like it's spelled. If you find a really cool hip hop channel, that is not us. Keep going. It's the one with the bow tie and the guy in glasses. We release every Thursday on various topics. So you can find us. And I'm sure the boys will link to both of our stuff. On Twitter, I am pressx_to-doubt. That's just me ranting and raving on Twitter if you want to hear that.
Can you send David those links? And David, can you throw them in the description?
I'll put them in the private chat.
Okay, perfect. Just out of curiosity, before Dale, you give your shameless plug. So who stole from who, Jordan?
Which one?
The Reason to Doubt name.
Oh, with the hip hop guys?
Did you steal from the hip hop guys, or did they steal from you?
So we didn't know that this is just Convergent Evolution. We didn't know that anybody else had this name until we'd already been like publishing for a little while, because they are mostly on YouTube, and we didn't do YouTube at first. The way we got our name was we were both in the Army, Jared and I, and we were like, we should do a skeptic channel. What should we call it? Well, there's 2 of us, and we doubt things. So Reason to Doubt. There you go. Okay. And so pure coincidence.
So nothing with reason to believe then.
No, that came up when I talked to Jess Waring. That was another question he had, and just another.
It was so funny. I remember when you were discussing about you and Jared actually doing the podcast. Like you hadn't decided whether you're going to do it. You said it was coming in the near future. And I was like, well, what are you going to call it? And you're like, oh, we're thinking about Reasons to Doubt. I was like, that's a perfect name. I didn't even know you were borrowing from anybody.
We weren't.
So,
just
exactly.
Great minds and all that.
It just
And since I haven't said it yet, this is a great conversation. You are an excellent interlocutor. Yeah. And while I don't agree with your content, or I don't agree with your conclusions, the content is very informative. So if people want to hear about Shroud of Torment from a believer's point of view, your channel is an excellent source.
And Dale, go ahead, brother. Tell people where they can find that channel.
Yeah, so as Jordan mentioned, I'm the host of Real Seekers on YouTube, or Real Seeker Ministries. If you find my blog, it's sorry, I'm horrible at plugging myself, but it's hang on one second. Real seekers singular ministries.wordpress.com. And that's my blog site. So I post up all my sources, scholarly papers. I'll be doing the same for this debate. So you can check that out and stuff like that. And yeah, Real Seekers on YouTube or Rumble video. And I have a bunch of shows on various topics and that sort of thing. But lately, a lot focused on the Shroud of Turin specifically. So yeah, look for that.
Right on, right on. I'm copy and pasting these links that Jordan just sent. David, what did you So, brother, we're at the closing remarks. It's time for our final comments. Go ahead, bro. What do you
brother,
think?
I mean, this is such a great discussion. I knew these guys would be stellar. I have confidence in both of them.
Yeah.
I mean, Jordan showed me such graciousness when we first got together and my failures. So, but yeah, it's funny because we actually met at my house, in my unfinished basement that was undergoing renovation, and which is still undergoing renovation because it never seems like I can get the flooding to stop sometimes. But yeah, there, and Dale, ever since we hooked up, man, it's been a great ride. We've been able to talk. You've been able to help me with my papers and walk me through some stuff in my masters and stuff like that. So I appreciate both of you, and I know you guys love to discuss these type of things. So of course, you guys are always welcome back, Dale. You're part of the show now, so
you can't get rid of me
here. But Jordan, you know that you're always welcome here, and if you ever have anything you want to put out, we're here to host it. So, but anyways, other than that, guys, I mean, I'm looking forward to the next couple weeks off. I mean, I will be taking the next couple weeks off because it is me and the wife's 10-year anniversary. So we got to do something special. So we're actually going to a bed and breakfast in closer to Jordan's area. We're actually going to be doing it around there and hitting one of the wine trails down there. And since we've been making wine, we want to taste other Virginia local wineries. So
it's hard for me to be happy for you because while you're gone, you have me filling in with shows.
Well, yeah, you got Tyler. I mean, Tyler can help you. But actually, me and Tyler are going to meet here within the next couple of days to discuss our documentary, and then we're going to pass on what we need you guys to do. So, but yeah, it's going to be a good break. But other than that, guys, I love this type of stuff. I love these topics. I love our guests. I love Tyler. I love the fellowship that we've created. And again, I mean, I can't ask for anything better. So, Tyler, I'll let you take it away, man.
I really like how you worded that last part, David, is that we're going to be handing down the traditions to Dale. And so not sola scriptura. You cannot just find this stuff written down, guys. And so we will be handing down those oral traditions to Dale and the team to take on the faith and altar thing. But yes, I enjoyed this a conversation. I love Jordan. It's been just an honor and a pleasure getting to know you over the past months now. I mean, I remember the first time we interacted, I came on as a guest on Pora, and we did the kind of topsy-turvy atheist and Christian you guys hosted. It was guest host month for Pora, and so that was the first time I interacted with you, man, and it's been just an honor and a pleasure doing these shows with you and getting to know you over these, like I said, these last few months, man. So I love you, bro, and it's great.
I agree. I am awesome.
You are very awesome, and I'm gonna get that bow tie one of these days. And so, Dale, and again, brother, like ever since we've met and ever since you've been on board, we've had our private conversations off of air, and I feel like we've just grown so much, not only spiritually but in our friendship. And so I thank God for it every day that I am friends with you and colleagues working together to do this. David, you're you, and so there's nothing much more I can say there. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Dirty heretic. But guys, it has been a blast, and so I encourage all of our listeners, go check out Reason to Doubt, go check out Real Seekers, come to your own conclusions. The thing we seem to lack in this society that we find ourselves in is critical thinking. We need more critical thinking happening every single day, and that's on topics we like, That's even on topics we don't care to get involved in. We need to critically think more. And so I'm a big advocate of putting that into practical practice. I mean, let's be more critical thinkers on these subjects whenever it comes to these topics that we love and we hold dear to our hearts. And so I want to thank our audience. Again, we've hit the 1,000 subscriber mark. We could not have done it without you. And if you would like to continue furthering our ministry, please prayerfully consider donating. It does take money to upgrade equipment. It does take money to advertise. Unfortunately, we live in that world where we have to have money to do those. And so if you would like to do that, we want to start a Patreon eventually. We do not have one up right now. And so if you would like to help fund our channel, email me again, faithunaltered@gmail.com, and I can give you a link to do that with. But until next time, y'all, we've got some good stuff coming up this month. David mentioned the documentary. We are working on a gospel documentary. So the impact of the gospel from the last 2,000 years of church history. We want to bring that to light in a way that has not been done before. And I think we're on the road to doing that. And so I'm excited to see that finally come to fruition and begin to start being produced. And so I'm excited for that. And I mean, that's really about it. That's all I've got. And until next time, stick around, and because we've got a lot more content coming for you all. And so again, thank you to our debaters. David, thank you so much for hosting. I've enjoyed this just phenomenally. And until next time, good night. God bless, and stay like Christ.